Everyone, and welcome to our meeting. And can I welcome those that are speaking this evening, and also can I watch any members of the public watching us on YouTube. Item 1, apologies for absence. I have apologies for absence from Councillor Wrench, and his substitute is Councillor Hensman. Sorry, Councillor Hensman, I took a blank. I think everybody else is present. Yes, they are. Item 2, declarations of interest. Does any member wish to declare the existence and nature of any disclosable pecuniary interest, other pecuniary interest, or non-pecuniary interest relating to items on the agenda, having regard to the Code of Conduct for members? Councillor Abbott.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm a member of Rivenhall Parish Council. This is in respect of agenda item 5A. And they have put in a representation, but I took no part in the discussion that they had at their January 2021 meeting about that, as the minutes 2054 confirm. As a former member of Essex County Council, I submitted representations on the Busgate proposal for the same agenda item 5A. Like other members here, I know a number of the speakers, obviously including Councillor Wright, and I also know some of the objectors. And I also took part in the local plan section 2 process in respect of the green buffer policy, but they're all non-pecuniary interests.
Thank you. I will declare a declaration on behalf of us all that Councillor Michael Lager is speaking this evening, and I think many of us know Councillor Lager, and Councillor Ross Plale, the Essex County Councillor. Also, Mr. David Fletcher is speaking on item 5B, and he is a past employee. I know not everyone knew him, but some of us might still remember him. So from that point of view, I've done a joint declaration. Anyone else? No. Item 3, the minutes. The minutes of the 28th of September and the 12th of October are being deferred this evening. They're not yet ready. So we go straight on to item 4, public question time. We have no general questions this evening. Those members of the public that wish to speak prior to each application. Item 5, planning applications. We have no applications under Part B, so we can go straight on to the Part A applications. And the first application, 5A, is application number 202060 out, Phase 4, land north-east of Rectory Lane, Rivenhall. This can be found on pages 6 to 75 of your agenda, and I do have speakers on this application. I just remind everyone that's speaking this evening, you do get 3 minutes, and we do time you, so I'll ask you to keep to your time, please. The first person wishing to speak on this application is Mr. Darren Hills, and he is an objector. Mr. Hills, would you like to come to the table and make your presentation, please?
Good evening. Thank you for letting me speak. What's the biggest crisis we face today? It's not housing, but our environment. World leaders are meeting at the COP26 summit to discuss this, but it seems locally we're not concerned about destroying arable land to grow crops and let wildlife flourish. I moved to a semi-rural location for many reasons, including to breathe cleaner air, listen to the birds twitter, and Mrs. Fox shouting at Mr. Fox while the badgers roam the area. I do miss the deer and the muntjac that used to roam around the area in the early hours, and the removal of the habitat for protected species such as skylarks, grey-crested newts, owls and bats is just so unnecessary and shocking. Beautiful woodland and large sections of arable land have already been lost in earlier phases of this development. Let's not make the same mistakes again and again. If this land must be developed, then put it to good use to help sustain the current population and the environment, not cram in more housing, causing suffocation and destroy the village element that current Rivenhall residents enjoy. Why can't the remaining fields be left to grow crops that can feed people, or maize to feed anaerobic digesters, which can produce electricity, or other power sources to generate megawatts of energy for the benefit of the current housing, or to charge cars cutting CO2 emissions? The report published by Innovate UK, called UK Transport Vision 2050, indicates that by 2050, cars will be up to 81% of overall traffic mileage on our roads. And from now until 2050, car demand will increase by 40%, which will mean more demand on electricity to charge them. Bus travel is expected to decrease, so why invest in bus routes when finding solutions to electricity shortages should be given a priority that the government are pushing for electric vehicles? It would seem the priorities are all wrong, and further research needs to be done on the area, its actual requirements, the real environmental impact for endangered species before giving serious consideration to this phase and saying yes. Better still, let the land live, breathe and supply food, or plant trees to re-establish a forest to provide a carbon offset. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hills. Thank you. The next person wishing to speak is Mrs. Anne Wright, and she's speaking on behalf of Mrs. M.A. Lee. Mrs. Wright, please.
Thank you for letting me speak. I am Anne Wright, a local resident, and I'm reading out a prepared statement from Mrs. Melanie Ailey, MIHT, FIHE, a highly qualified traffic management expert, as equally qualified as ECC's highways own experts. I will now read out the prepared statement that she is unable to attend in person. In January 2021, a report was submitted on behalf of the Rickstones Road Action Group objecting to this application and identified a number of concerns, including the fact that no assessment of impact has been undertaken and the lack of visibility at the proposed bus gate off Rickstones Road. The assumption has been made that no assessment of impact is required on the basis the developer contributes towards new bus services, which the applicant suggests will mean that the majority of residents will not use their car to and from the site. This is highly hypothetical, with no evidence provided to support such an assumption, and in reality, residents will still use the car as their main mode. The predicted traffic movements associated with a development of this size, even with good access to other modes, is likely to generate around 120 two-way car trips in the peak periods. The approval of a development of this size without any cumulative assessment of impact will make existing traffic congestion in Witham worse. Also, this would set a precedent for future development coming forward that a transport assessment would not be required on the basis that a high enough contribution is provided to bus and cycle improvements. This in turn will result in any potential mitigation that would benefit Witham not being provided. In addition to the above, the proposed bus or access off of Rickstones Road was identified in the Rickstones Action Group report as not conforming to the appropriate design standards critically relating to visibility. Whilst recent correspondence suggests an independent road safety audit has been undertaken, it does not appear to be on the website to confirm what points have been raised and addressed. The appropriate level of visibility needs to be determined based on actual recorded speeds, not on assumed speeds, or visibility should be based on DMRB standards. Whilst the Highway Authority has accepted the level of visibility being provided, it does not conform to the appropriate standards. This access leads onto an existing residential road and will affect the lives of residents living close to this access. It is no surprise that the applicant is not taking the bus route through their existing site, as they do not want to upset their customers, but it's okay to affect other existing residents. It is noted that the applicant's consultant has confirmed that the access onto Rickstones Road will not be used for construction traffic. This needs to be confirmed in the Section 106 agreement. May I just finish?
Yes, just carry on.
Thank you. The existing access will see an increase in movements by slow-moving buses, and the lack of visibility on a bend will inevitably result in an increase in accidents occurring. If approval is granted for this application, there will inevitably be a severe impact on the local roads within Witham, and incidents on Rickstones Road will inevitably increase. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mrs. Wright. The next person wishing to make a statement is Councillor Michael Lager. He is speaking on behalf of Witham Town Council. Councillor Lager.
Evening, members. Town Council's objections to this application are very briefly mentioned in the report and echo very much those of the Rivenhall Parish Council, but unfortunately they have been completely ignored by your planning officers in their report, and this is not for the first time. The local planning authority should have required a master plan for the site to accompany this outline application, which could have addressed widespread concerns over the lack of amenities and services, especially health, local shopping and employment in the north of Witham. This lack finds no adequate mitigation in the draft section 106 and Essex Highway's proposed changes in road, bus and cycle access, nor in additional funding for a community building well over a mile away. The site contains sand and gravel deposits and is a mineral safeguarding area where the LPA is required to be satisfied that not normal circumstances exist which justify permitting development within it. The committee report concentrates on commercial viability, but fails to mention a single not normal circumstance that would justify ignoring the strong protection for mineral deposits in both the NPPF and Essex's own plan. This alone should be a reason to refuse this application. Now, only in the last few days have final plans been published for major changes to Collingwood Road in the centre of Witham. These involve the narrowing of the carriageway to 6.75 metres, cycleways and double yellow lines on both sides of the road, Collingwood Road, between the station and Albert Road and the public hall, with removal of existing parking and 3 substantial mature trees. This is a busy route for buses and HGVs as well as cars. This potty and dangerous scheme also includes traffic lights in the middle of the railway bridge, a few yards from Eastern Road, which leads to the station car park entrance and exit, and is a scene of daily congestion. There's a second set of traffic lights just a few yards further on from the Albert Road junction, of which the planners appear unaware. A cyclist in Collingwood Road, or indeed most of Witham, is a rare sight, especially on the railway bridge. Access to the station cycle racks via Eastern Road would have been a much better idea, as would pavement sharing with cyclists who use the pavements anyway. Approve this and you'll have the morning traffic queuing most of the way from Braintree to Witham. Amazingly, the LPA haven't consulted the Town Council or anyone else in Witham on this new plan, nor have Essex Highways. Why did the LPA, when faced with such obviously daft highways advice, not commission their own expert advice to avoid suggestions of incompetence and as a defence against any future legal action? In fact, the required community involvement consultation on this application has been a farce, with swathes of Witham housing within yards of the site ignored in the applicant's own community consultations. Isn't it time for your members to stand up for residents rather than for developers and refuse consent, or at the very least to postpone any further consideration until the defects in this application have been made good? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Largo. The next person wishing to make a statement is Councillor Ross Plale. He is the Essex County Councillor for Witham Northern.
Dear Chair, thank you, and I'm incredibly disappointed to have to be addressing the Planning Committee this evening. I did not come into public service to oppose, but feel with little choice in making my opposition to these plans known, with myself and other residents incredibly disheartened by the recommendation to approve this application. The officer's report starkly highlights the number of planning policies of the council this proposed development would break and would set a dangerous and unnecessary precedent for future developers to exploit. The proposed site is not identified in Part 2 of the draft local plan, and as we have seen in recent decisions taken by this very committee, at the recommendation of officers, greater weight can now be given to the emerging local plan in accordance with the NPPF. Furthermore, the authority is able to demonstrate a 5-year land supply, as officers have highlighted on page 22 of their report, and this site has been rejected from the original quarter sites, so it's hard to see what has changed. As councillors will notice, this development sits outside the development boundary, being located in an area of the countryside, and is a departure of the policy RLP2 of the adopted local plan and policy CS5 of the core strategy, and as a result is the development plan as a whole. The proposal would also conflict with policies LPP1 and LPP60 of the Section 2 draft local plan. In a practical sense, this erodes the clear boundary between Witham and Rivenhall and a green buffer separating the two communities. A casualty of this is Rectory Lane, a protected lane as identified under policy RLP87 of the adopted local plan. This development would irreversibly damage and destroy the nature of this quiet lane. Essex Highway states that this development would be acceptable if it were in close proximity to services and facilities, as well as options for onward travel connections by public transport, cycling and walking. Unfortunately, there are very little services in the north of Witham, and the commitments promised from Bellways in this area do little to alleviate the problems. The proposed 0.3 miles, yes, 0.3 miles cycleway along the part of Collingwood Road is, in layman's terms, a complete joke. Piecemeal cycleways are generally a terrible idea and really quite dangerous in practice. I am one of those rare cyclists that Councillor Mrlaga refers to, and they regularly offer no safe way for the cyclist to rejoin the main public highway when they end. There was also, as referred, no public consultation from residents ahead of this application, and as a result, this feels like this has been added in at stealth. Key services and facilities in the BD officer's report is in close proximity to the site include a golf course and industrial site. There are no mention of doctor's surgeries or dentists, or that the schools referred to are close to capacity. One of the reasons this proposal is particularly unpalatable, can I finish?
I just let you finish your last sentence.
Thank you. Is the allocation of the SO 106 money designed for local improvements and community buildings. It is unacceptable and unfair that continuingly SO 610 money is drained from developments in the north of the town to mitigate previous administrations of this council's failing to ensure that money was secured in a timely manner for the Maltings Lane development. In summary, this development is not required to achieve the authority's building targets and further threatens trust and reputation damage to the council amongst Witham residents. Now is not the time. Residents have been patient in waiting for a local plan, which this council rightly placed a great deal of emphasis on. Years of painstaking efforts have been undertaken by this authority, and members of the council now in a position to support the local plan. Making so many exceptions to the emerging local plan to accommodate this application is unacceptable, and many of the suggested community benefits would be detrimental to the future of the town and its public services. Thank you, and thank you for letting me go over it.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for coming. The next person wishing to make a statement is Councillor Bob Wright, and he is the BDC ward councillor for the area.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. This development is in Rivenhall, not Witham, as stated in the office report. This is not an allocated site in the current local plan. We have a 5.34-year housing supply, so the housing is not required. When phase 1 was given planning permission, the housing was moved away from the John Ray Walk, Rectory Lane, as it is a protected quiet lane. You are now recommending building all along this lane. When phase 3 was given planning permission, you voted to save the hedge. Now it is being recommended to remove part of the hedge to open a gap for a foot cycleway. This is not consistent. The exit could be put further along this site with no damage to the hedge. You have rejected sites in Rain, Bocking, Black Notley and Silver End on the fact that there is a 5.34-year housing stock and not being in the local plan. Now we are saying this is very fragile and cannot be relied upon. What is the truth on this? Is this favouring one developer over the rest? The buses are being diverted away from the older residents in Forest Road to the potentially younger residents in the new development. If the bus gate is not approved, the buses could continue along Forest Road into Evans Way, through the new estate, and out again through Evans Way onto Forest Road, and serve both sets of residents and not disadvantage the older and disabled residents walking to the new estate to catch the bus. Are BDC, ECC or Bellways purchasing the front gardens in Rickstones Road to improve the visibility for the bus lane? In fact, is it legal or safe to plan to put a zebra crossing across residents' driveways? Policy RLP2 states that new developments will be confined to town boundaries and village envelopes. The new development is in open countryside in Rivenhall. Local residents are concerned about the safety of Rickstones Road. It is because they witness near misses every week, and 3 such accidents occurred in 1 week earlier this year. The vision statement states that this development, designed for layout and house design, will be based on the best Whittam has to offer. What we will get is basic Footway designs. If you want to hear about the build standard, I understand you only have to go on the Rivenhall Park Facebook page. Not very good publicity for Bellways. Bellways want to protect the rural nature of John Way Walk. This is easily achieved. Withdraw the application. It is stated that this will not affect the coalescence with Rivenhall and Whittam, because you have already granted planning permission on the Blue Bowl site. That closes the sense of separation between Whittam and Rivenhall. You have caused this problem by early planning decisions. I've got a little bit more, sir. Rivenhall is not getting any benefits whatsoever from this development. Even the proposed 106 money is being spent on facilities in the south of Whittam. It is good we can off-road cycle to the station, but once we get there, there is nowhere to leave the bikes, as the waiting list for the bike shed is well over 3 years long and not even moving. The bus lane is running between 2 football pitches. This is not very safe. Finally, it is stated that the football pitches on the academy site are not used. This is in fact untrue, as you only have to stand in my back garden at weekends and listen to the players and fans using foul language towards the ref. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Thank you. The final person wishing to make a statement this evening is Mr. Oliver Spencer. He is the agent from Andrew Martin Planning. Mr. Spencer, please. Good evening.
Thank you. Good evening, councillors. I'm Olivier Spencer from Andrew Martin Planning, and I represent Bellway Homes. The proposals comprise an outline application for 230 homes, new sports pitches and changing facilities, an equipped area of play for older children and young people, extended allotments and extensive sustainable transport improvements. Access for private cars is proposed via Forest Road and Evans Way only, with a bus access from Rickstones Road allowing bus services to loop through the site. The proposals are a result of nearly 2 years of discussions and meetings with the council's officers. For most of this period, the council was unable to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, and although this situation appears to have changed recently, the supply remains marginal and would benefit from being boosted further. This application would make a sensible contribution in a sustainable location. The proposals comply with the definition of sustainable development in the NPPF. They achieve a social objective by providing 230 new homes, including 69 affordable homes, with a mix of apartments, houses and wheelchair bungalows. By creating well-designed and beautiful spaces in accordance with our vision statement and future design code, and by delivering 18 acres of public open space, which is 3 times more than the policy requirement. They achieve an economic objective by supporting over 100 jobs on site during the construction phase and increasing expenditure in local businesses once the development is complete. And they achieve an environmental objective through a net gain in both biodiversity and trees on site by incorporating sustainable drainage systems with an extra 40% allowance for climate change, and by providing renewable energy technology and an EV charging point for every dwelling. Furthermore, the green buffer in the emerging Section 2 local plan, which is to prevent coalescence between Whittam and Rivenhall, is untouched by the proposals. A draft Section 106 agreement has been prepared and will secure the following: a £2.1 million contribution for enhanced bus services in the town, with greater frequency, earlier and later services on weekdays and improved weekend services. a new foot and cycleway along Rickstones Road between the site and the existing schools on Conrad Road, the closure of the southern part of Rectory Lane to vehicles, new cycle lanes on Collingwood Road linking the railway station to the town centre, and with no need to lose any of the large avenue trees that flank the road. A £2.5 million contribution for additional early years primary and secondary school places, and approximately £250,000 in contributions towards a new community centre at Maltings Lane, expanded provision at the Whittam Health Centre and library services. Finally, the Council's officers have seen fit to recommend the scheme for approval. With this in mind, I respectfully request that members follow this advice and resolve to grant permission. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Members, that brings us to the end of people making statements. We will now come to the presentation, and the presentation is going to be made by Catherine Ullman. Catherine, good evening and thank you.
Sorry, apologies, there won't be a moment. It's just not showing up on there. It's not it. Oh, that one. It's not showing up. Showing on the screen. Okay.
Can you close that box?
Okay, I might need them. Sorry, it just wasn't showing up on the screen. I had to close it. It's rather preferred other windows I had open to show me. Okay, so hopefully everybody can hear me now. Is that one? Why is it echoing? Quit sharing the Okay, thank you. So as you can see on the screen, the application is the outline approval with all matters reserved for up to 230 dwellings, including affordable homes, public open space, including sports pitches and facilities, neighbourhood equipped play area, parkland, natural green space, vehicle access via Forest Road and Evans Way, a bus, cycle and pedestrian connection on Rickstones Road, SUDS landscaping and associated infrastructure. It normally comes up on the screen. So before I start, I'll just recap on updates for you. One letter from Right Honourable Priti Patel, local MP, containing letters of objection made to her, and an objection from the Rickstones Road Action Group, and counter response from the applicant's highways consultant have been received.
alongside 5 additional letters of objection from local residents. These don't raise any new issues. They do highlight a number of misunderstandings, which I shall try to clarify in my presentation. The most notable of these being a misunderstanding about which trees are being potentially lost on Collingwood Road, and the prospect of money being secured by Section 106 not being spent in the local area, and somehow being spent on improvements in Braintree, which I can assure you is not what is proposed or what is the case as described. We've also received a response from Braintree District Council's ecology advisors confirming they are content with the approach and conditions being proposed in relation to the tree T1 noted in your reports. So that's the one that requires further bat surveys before it could be removed. And they confirmed they have no objections to the scheme. Members would have also been provided with a full copy of the Ramblers Association email, which highlights a desire to have a 3.5 metre footway along the northern section of Rickstones Road. We'll come to that obviously in the presentation, but I think the Highway Authority's view is that it doesn't necessarily need to be 3.5 metres, it could be 3, but on the other hand we could make it 3.5 as long as that's practical. So that's within the gift of members to ask for should they desire it. So in terms of the location plan, that's up here on the screen for you now. The site is 17 sort of hectares or so of agricultural land at present. It is in countryside, located, as you can see, sort of northeast of Witham. The Bellway sort of phases 1 and 2, you can see in the darker sort of shaded housing that there in the south. You'll note that the site red line includes up in the north there visibility displays on Rickstones Road, and similarly a footpath which would cut across Bellway Phase 3 development known as sort of bluebells in this location here. And we also note that in the south there's an area of woodland, a triangle of woodland, which is included in the application red line, and to the south there in the blue, that's the allotment land. There is a green buffer which is not within the red line. It is containing the golf course, which is to the east. That's protected under LPP 72 of the emerging plan. You'll note obviously the dotted line, which is Rectory Lane, and that is a protected lane as defined in RLP 87 of the adopted plan. And along the boundary here of the site, really sort of around the phase 1 really, and the existing dwellings in Witham is the RLP2 boundary of the local plan, the development boundary of Witham. So this is countryside, as I did mention. The site lies within a minerals safeguarding area, resource safeguarding area. It's also within a habitat regulation assessment zone of influence. And here's an aerial photograph for you now. So you can see, you can just make out sort of in the north here the phase 3 development, Bellway, sort of along Rickstones Road. You note the bend there, sort of just east of the Rectory Lane sort of running south. The Rectory, the Rivenhall Old Rectory, is Grade 2 listed, located sort of here. As you sort of travel down, there's the phase 1, phase 2, belts of woodland, sort of just the side of the access road to the golf course. There's a maintenance track which goes from the golf course, sort of in the north there, you can see north-east, along the edge of the site, and then crosses across the site to meet up with Rectory Lane. That's
going to be retained. There's some businesses sort of up here on Rickstones Road, which are accessed from Rickstones Road, and several dwellings whose rear boundaries abut the north of the site. And as you sort of travel into this sort of more southerly parcel, you can see there's a sort of site compound there being used by Bellway at the minute. An area of woodland within that, and then a larger area of woodland, triangle of woodland really, which I pointed out, that triangle sort of next to the allotments, sort of on the previous plan. The schools are located, you can just see sort of in north there, that's where their new special educational needs school is going. And then beyond that, there's schools on Conrad Road, and I've got some better plans for you, sort of which shows connectivity later in the presentation. So in terms of land use, we've got a number of parameter plans which the development would be tied to if approved. This land use plan, obviously, you can see some of the constraints as set out on here, really. So running along parallel to Rectory Lane, there is a high pressure gas main which requires an easement, and therefore no development can occur obviously in that area. There's also a number of existing footpaths which cross the site and form part of the John Ray Walk. They come from Rectory Lane sort of down towards phase 1 and the sort of existing Fort Play area, and then run again upwards into that woodland and then out towards the golf course. There's also a high voltage electricity cable which you will note in the sort of orange colour, which runs sort of parallel to that woodland, north-south, and that's obviously another constraint in terms of the layout. So as I said, the application is for 230 dwellings, 69 affordable. There would be 7.6 hectares of open space comprised of sports pitches in the north here, an area of open space, sort of linear park along parallel to Rectory Lane, additional neat play area in the south, in this area of woodland, and then woodland parkland sort of walks along the northern boundaries of the site, and a suds area along the southern boundary. In terms of green infrastructure, this plan sort of generally we've covered most of those elements. However, you will note there is an additional landscape planted edge annotated on this plan, and that's quite important in terms of being able to provide sufficient screening and mitigation for potential harm to the setting of the rectory, which lies on the opposite side of Rectory Lane from the development. In terms of vehicle access, you can see there that the main vehicle access would be proposed to be, whilst obviously access is reserved matters, they would be bound by these parameters. So the main access would need to be from Evans Way, which is the existing spine road through phases 1 and 2, and then exiting onto Forest Road, sort of down in the south. So that would obviously continue up. You'd retain the golf access as usual, sort of running north of that. You need to make a break in that woodland belt, and obviously to break through into the parcel beyond. And then that access then runs obviously up through the site, providing Spine Road, sort of that developable area in the north. Retention of the golf course maintenance access, of course, along that northern boundary. And then beyond that, critically, that road would become only used or restricted to use by buses, motorcycles and taxis only, by virtue of traffic regulation order, which would need to be made and secured. It would be secured under the Section 106 agreement, and whereby buses could potentially loop through the site and up onto Rickstones Road, exiting in the north here with an improved access, which would provide additional visibility sort of looking sort of, I suppose that's really southwest really, towards the schools, etc., and direction of Whittam. So you've got better visibility on that corner there in order for the benefit, obviously, of the buses, who then wouldn't need to turn so that they sort of went into the other side of the carriageway, but also the businesses that use that access would benefit from the improvements with that visibility display. Sorry, just cover, it's not on this one. Okay, so again, I suppose with access really in mind, Rectory Lane is proposed to be closed to vehicles from a point in the south, approximately sort of here. So that yellow bit would only be able to be used by pedestrians and cyclists. I think officers' view is that that is in line with the aspirations of the village design statement for that lane to sort of have reduced vehicular traffic. And then in the north there, that obviously do need to retain some access for the rectory itself and the lodge, which is situated on Rectory Lane. And that would be secured by traffic regulation order, which is capable of being made. There's nothing stopping that occurring. In terms of pedestrian access, you can see that there'd be a number of routes sort of proposed through the sites which would connect to the existing footpaths and obviously still retain the existing footpaths within the open space, but also connecting sort of each area of the site and running north, allowing pedestrians to either use Rectory Lane or to come out from the site in the north here and then walk towards the schools on Conrad Road via a new footway improvements, which I will go into more detail sort of in this northern area here opposite Bluebells. In terms of storey heights, those would be constrained by the parameters plan. So you're looking at 2 stories predominantly through the site, but up to 2.5 stories around the main access sort of Spine Road area, which is shown in the sort of darker orange colour. Master plan has been provided, which satisfies officers that there is sufficient space to accommodate this quantum of dwellings on the site without any adverse impacts upon residential amenity, and that parking standards can be complied with, etc., etc. This master plan is sort of an early version. It hasn't been updated, but it proves the point essentially that officers are satisfied the quantum could be accommodated on the site. This master plan is indicative. It wouldn't necessarily be, well, they wouldn't be tied to it as they would be with the parameter plans. So a vision statement has been provided by the applicant, which I would say is very ambitious in a way, in that it certainly sets a precedent that will need to be aspiring towards very high standards of design, and also emphasises the importance of beauty in design and the aesthetic qualities as well as those sort of practical ones. I think officers are satisfied that we've got undertakings towards tree-lined streets, all that type of thing, and we've also got some really promising character areas developing within the vision statement, which can be carried forward with a design code which would be required prior to a reserve matters application. We do have a lot of detail in terms of possible tree removal, and we obviously have to bear in mind the application is an outline, so we're not considering matters of detailed layout here, but we obviously are also binding them in terms of parameters. So there are certain areas of trees which will inevitably have to go. They are predominantly some trees to provide for the visibility display in the north, some trees in order to provide the bus lane or gate, trees to provide, knock through that woodland in order to get from one parcel to the other, section of woodland would be lost in order to provide the neat play area and connecting to the fort play area in that location down there in the south, sort of accessible obviously to phases 1 and 2 as well. A small area of woodland and a few scattered trees in this southern sort of parcel here. And some sycamores potentially in order to just widen that pathway connecting from Rectory Lane up to Rickstones Road and to make it available for cycles as well. And then the hedge, which we'll come to in a sort of later part of the presentation, really sort of 4 metres of hedgerow in order to provide an uncontrolled crossing across Rickstones Road. And members do have a full sort of description of tree removals, etc., and the quality of the tree belts and everything in the report. Most of the trees to be removed are category C, or very few category B trees. Ecological appraisal, this is also covered in the report, but what it did highlight is that there were a number of trees on the site which were identified as having back roost potential. They are those trees which are shown with the orange dots. All of those are being retained with the exception of tree 1, which is this tree here, which I'm pointing to with my cursor. That is a dead oak tree. Unfortunately, it wasn't possible to survey the tree fully due to it being unsafe and covered in ivy. And therefore, while it was sort of conservatively assessed, because it had a lot of ivy over it, you can't really tell sort of what's underneath, what quality of that might be. So further surveys are required at the correct times of year. So that tree, the presumption is that that tree will be retained, unless the surveyors obviously make a case for its removal, in which case then it could be removed and then the bus lane can be provided. And I think officers are sort of fairly satisfied that there's a fairly high likelihood that tree, there won't be a problem removing that tree necessarily, and there is mitigation already proposed in terms of any potential that that tree might have and sort of compensating for that. Coming to the reptiles mitigation in relation to the allotments. So part of the proposed application is to provide an extension to the allotment site, which you can see as marked A in the red line on the plan. And the existing allotment site is just sort of next to that in the peachy coloured line. Unfortunately, that area, which is sort of marked in the orange, was a previous sort of existing reptile receptor site. So when they put the first allotments in, they moved all the reptiles into the orange area. But in order to extend the allotment site, they would need to put up some fencing and to exclude the reptiles, encourage them out of that area, and then obviously translocate them as necessary in order to provide the extension to the allotments. And they're also going to be providing some additional habitat in the blue areas. And they wouldn't necessarily absolutely be here. That's still to be agreed under the. So what I mean is that they wouldn't be specifically in that location. The location of the areas could be moved or they could be made bigger, because further surveys are required in order to sort of inform the very final plan for exactly how this would be laid out. So this is indicative at this stage, but I think all principles sort of are pointing in the direction of there being no sort of adverse impact on reptiles population in the long term. So now turning to the photographs, this is the area where the bus access is proposed on Rickstones Road. So you can see the existing businesses, the existing access that would need to be widened, and then the visibility stay provided. So therefore we are looking at potentially removing some of these trees here in this location. This is looking, so you're going towards, you've come from the bus access area photograph I just showed you. You're now going towards Witham, and you're passing Rectory Lane here, and you're looking back out of Witham, I suppose, essentially, So this is the bend which is of concern to local residents. So the bus access is beyond this bend. Now we're looking the other way, so we've got the Rectory Lane sort of over here really, I suppose. We've got the Bluebells development and the phase sort of 3 Bellway here. This is the hedgerow, of which there would need to be a sort of an opening created in order to provide the uncontrolled crossing, in order to allow this footway that you can make out on the other opposite side of the road to be improved and widened in order to be available for cycles use as well. And this is the footway of which, you know, residents may potentially use in order to travel down to the schools on Conrad Road. So again, this is looking now, same sort of area really. So this is Rickstones Road, this is the Bluebells development, this is the Rectory Lane junction. And again, it just gives you a bit of a wider picture of the width of that verge really, I suppose, where the footway would be widened and provided. So we're on Rectory Road now, sort of looking either way really. This is where the opening would be made connecting Rectory Road to the development site. And there would be some sort of staggered cycle barriers in this location, allowing people to cross and then access the development. And then equally, they could go through the Bluebells development out towards Rickstones Road in this location here. So the view from the northwest corner of the site, looking east, you can see sort of temporary compound here being used by Bellway in order to service the Bluebells development, phase 3. This is the boundary in the north, really, sort of with the business units on Rickstones Road. And then you're looking at this eastern boundary with the golf course here in the distance. This is standing on the golf maintenance track when I took this photograph, looking north towards the back of properties on Rickstones Road. So these are the dwellings on Rickstones Road. This is the boundary with the golf course. So you can see sort of hedgerow and trees. And again, this is sort of the area of woodland where potentially would need to be lost in order to break through, in order to provide the bus gates and lane. And again, sort of looking towards Rectory Lane really in this area here. And then looking the other way, so now looking, this is Rectory Lane, this is earlier phase of development, phase 1 Bellway, and the golf course and the foreplay area. This is the boundary with the golf course, so again looking south. This is inside that central woodland belt, so I'm walking the footpath here, the John Way Walk. And as you exit that, that's what you see. And you can see the earlier phases of development, again the play area, and the woodland belt sort of just off the left of your photograph here. This is a pond, and that would be retained and improved. So I'm looking the other way from the footpath. This is the woodland belt where the spine road would need to go through in order to be connecting the two parcels. And this is earlier phases. This is the boundary of Rectory Lane, so you can see there's quite a few trees within the site already, sort of highway boundary along Rectory Lane. You can't really make out the rectory itself beyond that. This is the area where I pointed out there needs to be a small section of woodland removed in order to provide the neat play area. And that's that there. So this is just looking along the very southern boundary of the site with the earlier phases here and Rectory Lane here. Rectory Lane itself, as you can see, very green, beautiful lane. obviously would be retained, and I think this section here would no longer be passable by motorised vehicles and only permitted for cycle and pedestrian access. So as you come out, as you are on Rectory Lane, you can obviously cross across the site, as I mentioned sort of previously, towards the earlier phases of development. So this footpath would be retained; it wouldn't be removed, and other footpaths would be provided. This is an area. This area really here would form part of the open space. Would need to provide a turning area on Rectory Lane in order to allow vehicles to turn around because it would become a dead end. So we're not losing any sort of vegetation or trees in order to provide that, but additional screening would probably be needed, additional vegetation and planting in order to provide the necessary sort of mitigation for the appearance of that any visual intrusion. The old rectory itself sits behind quite an established evergreen hedge, as you can see there, and is some distance from Rectory Lane itself. Now obviously all of those grounds are the setting of the rectory, and as I have highlighted, there is harm to the setting of the rectory as a result of the development, but that can be significantly mitigated by the additional planting and supplementary planting to the existing hedgerow along Rectory Lane, which is proposed. And this is just a view from the golf club access, looking sort of south-east into the site. So this is really that sort of southern parcel I was talking about, just south of the Spine Road. So this is phase 2 over here. Then you've got golf course sort of over here, and you've got that woodland triangle really you're looking at here. And these are the scattered trees which would need to be lost in order to make way for the development. And so there's these 2 pine trees here, which are category B. Sports pitch layout is indicative, but it does show provision or how you could provide 2 pitches there with associated runoff areas, and then a good distance between those and the Spine Road themselves to allow an avenue of trees. Equally, a changing rooms and pavilion sort of building here, and associated car parking. This area here you wouldn't be able to plant in that area because that is the easement for the gas main. So these are the plans for the bus lane and gates, just obviously confirming that the section in red there is that which would be restricted by vehicles. They'd be controlled by CCTV camera, which Essex County Council has found to be a successful means of restricting traffic in other areas of Essex. In terms of local pedestrian connectivity, you can see sort of the routes that would be provided through the site going north and then obviously across and onto Rickstones Road here. The crossing point across Rickstones Road would be located here where my cursor is, and there is a provision within the section 106 subject to Highway Authority agreement because the detailed design still needs to be drawn up for a controlled crossing between points X here, the access to the bus lane, or Y here on Forest Road, and between those 2 points section 106 agreement would require for a controlled crossing to be provided. So in terms of wider cycle connectivity, we're now looking sort of really how we're going to get south from the development into the town centre of Witham. So there is already provision for a cycle route through here as part of the early phases that needs to be provided under conditions. So there's no getting out of that in terms of the developer side of things. And then running along Motts Lane and Cutthroat Lane, connecting then up sort of and down into the town centre, and now potentially sort of as you're running past the station there, in this area here, this is where the Collingwood Road cycle improvements are proposed, which I will go into in more detail in a moment. So in terms of footpath and cycleway crossings on Brickstones Road, the plans really are just too detailed to sort of show you or zoom in for you, but suffice to say that there would be this connection obviously from Rectory Road taking you through the Bluebells development, allowing you to cross Rickstones Road via an uncontrolled crossing or potentially a controlled crossing in a location still to be determined, and then runs sort of along the northern side of that road via an improved cycle stroke footpath, which would then take you towards the schools on Conrad Road. And just to show you the Bluebells development and what was proposed there, so there was only a very sort of narrow footpath previously proposed there, so that will need to obviously be widened. That's why that's in the red line of this site. And then you'll need to obviously come through this existing hedgerow, which was proposed to be retained. But I think it's 4 metres that's required of hedgerow to be removed in that location in order to allow a crossing to be provided. Now potentially if nobody wanted to use that uncontrolled crossing, they could still walk obviously through the Bluebells development and out sort of in this location here. On Rectory Lane, again, just showing you that red area is the area which would be restricted to vehicles. I think we've gone through that in quite a bit of detail already. And on Collingwood Road, so this plan is showing you shared cycle route sort of running out from the station there on Albert Road. Then you'd need to cross the road via a new crossing, which would be synchronised with the lights which are north of that. Now officers are aware of the congestion and the lights themselves, but if they're synchronised then there's absolutely no need for that to present an additional hindrance to traffic really, or to create further congestion. And then once you'd crossed, you'd travel sort of along this footway here again. That would be a shared footpath cycleway. And the road would need to be narrowed in that location in order to provide it, and potentially trees would need to be lost. There are 3 trees, which I will come to in a moment when I show you pictures of those. And then running sort of south of the junction with Gwynarthon Valley, you would find yourselves provided with a stepped cycle lane, and that's one of the that would be one of the first in the district. It is in line with local transport note recommended guidance, and it is what the guidance is recommending now is for cycles to really be given a status in their own right as a vehicle in their own right, so they would have their own segregated path, which the removal of place, and that requires a traffic regulation order. Traffic regulation order application has not been made yet. When it is made, residents, etc., will be able to raise objections to that via a consultation process which takes place. And if it is deemed by the county council that those consultations are such that that cycleway should not be provided or needs to be amended, then there are provisions within the Section 106 agreement which would still ensure that the majority of the cycle route is provided, alternatives are explored, and potentially if none of those are able to be provided, i.e. this sort of step cycleway, then a contribution would need to be made to improvements elsewhere in Witham, and arrangements would need to be made in order to compensate for the loss of that sort of aspect of the scheme, really, and the benefit that it would provide in officers' minds. And Collingwood Road, just to show you in detail, these are the category C trees on the corner, which potentially might need to be removed in order to provide pedestrian visibility space, or the visibility space that's required anyway, in order to be able to cross over at that point. in Collingwood Road itself, you can see these lovely lime trees. None of those are going, they're all staying. So, as you're aware, it's a flat planning balance in terms of the consideration of this application, as the council can demonstrate a 5-year land supply. In terms of adverse impacts, those are set out in detail in the report, but they do consist of a conflict with the development plan, so RLP2, CS5, but only in so far as I suppose there is the boundaries as identified in those policies of the town are being crossed, I suppose, rather than the fact that there are actual impacts associated with that in terms of loss of countryside, etc., which would be unacceptable in that sense. And again, although the heritage balance is considered by officers to have been satisfied as per the MPPF, there is a conflict with the wording of RLP 100 and SP7 in terms of there would be harm to the listed building. And there would be partial conflict with SP7 and CS8 in terms of loss of best and most versatile agricultural land. I think we've highlighted in the report that there would be a conflict in principle with policy S8 of the Minerals and Waste and Local Plan, insofar as there would be a sterilisation of a minerals resource as a result of this application. And whilst there might not be a prospect of the resource being used in the immediate future, there was that possibility that has been ruled out in the long term as such. However, I think the arguments in relation to that, as I come to further down, are very much around the weight to be attributed to that. And we've also got conflict with LPP1 and 60 for the same reasons of the Section 2 plan, in the fact that the site is in countryside, so therefore in conflict with LPP1, and it causes harm to this building, therefore LPP 60. Landscape harm has been identified, albeit the site is very contained within the landscape. There isn't a wider landscape harm. There would obviously be loss of trees, however there would also be reprovision of trees throughout the site, and a net gain really in trees could be assured as part of this application. And there would be harm to the amenity of the footpaths, albeit those footpaths have already influenced really quite heavily by the proximity of the early phases of development, and therefore the sense of arrival and leaving, and a stark contrast, I suppose, between urban and rural countryside is not really evident in these particular footpaths, and therefore the loss of amenity is not perhaps as high as it potentially could be. Harm to the listed building as explored. However, obviously officers consider that the heritage balance has been satisfied. Increased demand on the highway network is inevitable as a result of, obviously, inhabitants of the development would require cars, and therefore not all of that could be mitigated for, yet there would be some, we'll come into in the benefits, some offset from that for the package of measures which is designed to provide a genuine choice of transport modes for inhabitants and the wider community. In terms of sterilisation of the mineral resource, we have acknowledged there is a conflict with paragraph 212 of the MPPF, but therefore we are not arguing that there are not normal circumstances in this particular instance. What we are saying is that the weight to be given to this conflict is not sufficient to render it in conflict with the MPPF as a whole, and therefore and that's the argument on that particular side of things. It's very similar to the best and most versatile land argument, really, and so the proliferation and the provision of the mineral resource land in Braintree is quite great, and therefore the impact that this particular site would have has to be put within that context, really. Sorry. And just off the screen there, apologies, lost of best and most versatile agricultural land, which I think members will be familiar with. Again, the arguments in relation to that set out in the report. Benefits, delivery of market and affordable housing with the associated economic and social benefits of housing, which shouldn't be underestimated and are significant in officers' minds. The maintenance of the 5-year housing land supply. Obviously, we all understand that these are not, they're minimums that need to be provided, not maximums. Benefits in terms of conservation of the protected lane characteristics as officers see it in terms of Rectory Lane. The package of measures is set out is quite extensive and unusual for an application of this kind, and does weigh in the balance in favour of this application. Over and above that would be that which is needed in order to mitigate from the impacts of this development. The provision of the sports pitches, again, is considered to be significant benefit for the wider community, and we've got provision of an area of open space which exceeds that required under policy, which would obviously also be accessible to the local community. And so proposals do conflict with the development plan as a whole. It is an accessible location, Witham, in this location, and there is a genuine choice of transport modes which could be further improved by what is on the table here in front of you. The flat balance in officers' minds is an on-balance decision, but officers do consider this is sustainable development by virtue of the additional package of transport measures which is being provided, and therefore compliance is found with the NPPF as a whole, including paragraph 11. And officers recommend approval subject to section 106. I do have just one amendment for you to the recommendation, which is in terms of the affordable housing split for affordable rent and shared ownership. So that would need to be 2 to 1 rather than 70-30 as previously proposed. And that is in order to comply with paragraph 65 of the NPPF, which states that 10% of the total number of homes be available for affordable home ownership. And just some additional criteria there in terms of the building regulations part M4 for wheelchair user bungalows compliance. So nothing's changed there essentially, it's just further detail. And the applicant has sort of in the interim between the report being published proposed to agree to a condition which would see all of the dwellings on the site provided with one smart electrical vehicle charging point rather than just the requirement for the infrastructure and sockets and ducting, etc., whereby then the inhabitant of the dwelling would sort of provide their own charge. They'd have to go out and get their own charging point. So with a smart electric vehicle charging point, that would be in place. So if members seek to accept it, we can amend that condition 13 as proposed here and set out for you on the screen. And that's all from me. Obviously, questions I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you very much indeed for a very detailed presentation. Thank you. Let me just clarify one thing. Even the agent refers to it as being Rivenhall, but throughout your presentation you refer to it as Witham. I mean, it is Rivenhall, isn't it?
It lies within the parish of Rivenhall.
Thank you.
It's on the outskirts
Yes,
of Witham.
I know where it is, but I just, yeah. Councillor Abbott.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I hope members will bear with me because this application has profound implications for Rivenhall and, as we have heard, for North Witham and parts of Central Witham as well, so I do have a fair bit to cover. not least because I believe there are material omissions in the officer's report, and we are required to consider we are required to take into account all material considerations. Thank you, Madam Chairman, for making that point. I only heard the word Rivenhall mentioned once in the report, and there were no photographs actually shown of Rickstone's End, which is the sort of hamlet part of Rivenhall into which the bus gate access will go. Extraordinary, really. So the Bellway brochure starts with the words, after working closely with BDC for several years, they're bringing forward this application. And the description of the application describes it as phase 4. Now, I don't take anything away from officers for the time they've taken discussing this with Bellway, but this is not a planned site. The phase 4 description is almost like, you know, the next thing in a line. This is an unallocated site in the countryside, and it's an application for development outside of the boundaries of both the existing and the emerging local plan. It is therefore, by definition, a speculative application. Now, in the file for this application, the planning policy report states that this site is outside development boundary and not allocated in the adopted plan. It also says that this scheme would result in the total housing in North East Witham rising to 615 houses. That is actually not accurate. It's 823 if you include the Conrad Road site. It's a very substantial amount of housing being built in North Witham and Rivenhall. On page 8 of the officer report, it stated that the council can give some weight to the section 2, but of course, as I've already said, this site is not allocated in section 2. On page 10, there's a fundamental mistake where it says that the western extent of this site abuts the Witham development boundary on Rectory Lane. It does not. The boundary of Witham, the development boundary, is along Forest Road. The whole of the west side of this development is in the countryside, separated from Witham, and is in Rivenhall Rural Parish. And indeed, the officer didn't actually show, and it's not mentioned in the report, where the actual Rivenhall village boundary lies, which is some several hundred metres to the north. On page 10, the report admits that the application site abuts the rear gardens in Rickstones Road. But again, does not say that these houses are in Rivenhall. These are Rivenhall residents. And this development will come right up to the back of those houses. So clearly this site will result in coalescence with the village. Page 11 sets out that this is an indicative application with all matters are reserved. That's quite unusual. So it is both indicative and speculative. On page 14, there is no objective analysis of highway impacts. But it admits, and the officer did, to be fair, say this, that there will be an increase of trips on the local roads. Now, I think this is one of the most serious points for Witham, and many, many residents, and I know they've emailed, I've been getting emails as well, many members of the committee will have seen the same. The B1018 through Witham is already heavily congested at peak times, with long queuing on Collingwood Road, on the Avenue, on Braintree Road, on Cressing Road, sometimes on Rickstones Road, and indeed on the roads that feed into them, such as Chipping Hill. Albeit some of the residents from this development will use buses and some will cycle and some will walk, no doubt, as has been admitted, the traffic levels will increase. Now on page 17, the Braintree District Council Environmental Health Officer says there will be no exceedance predicted of air quality. But I had a look at this. The 2020 BDC air quality report says that site BR5, which is on the railway bridge, very close to where the proposed crossing is, over, near the junction with Eastern Road and Collingwood Road, is already consistently exceeding the 40 micrograms per cubic metre nitrogen dioxide limit. And indeed, there are no air quality monitoring points north of this. I think I'd be very interested, well, a lot of people would be very interested to see what the air quality is like further along Braintree Road. On page 15, the officer report says the NHS has no objection, but that's not actually what the NHS said. I've got the document here. The NHS said the proposed development is likely to have an impact on the services of GP practices operating within the vicinity. The GP practices do not have the capacity for additional growth resulting from this development and cumulative development in the area. It goes on to say there is very limited capacity in Witham and the surrounding area to take more patients. it says that the existing GP practices do not have the capacity to accommodate the additional growth, and that this site will generate approximately 529 additional residents. It does go on to say that through the legal agreement, mitigation can be provided by extra funding. But the point I'd make on that, Madam Chairman, is there is no doctor's surgery in Rivenhall, there's no doctor's surgery in Whittam North, and none of the Section 106 money acquired from development so far in the area, and that includes Silver End and Cressing as well, has provided one little bit of extra capacity in the doctor's surgeries. They are all having to cope with increased demand, and as indeed many residents have told members of this committee, some of them can't even register, and many have to wait very long times to see their doctors. On page 17, the report mentions the harm to the setting of the old rectory, which will become largely surrounded by development. And page 30, the report says that that harm weighs against the application. On page 17, BDC Landscape Services says it has no objection, despite, and I know this is a hobby horse of mine, the mass loss of trees on this site, yet again, and I'll go on to that in a bit later as to what the numbers are on that. On page 18 and 19, it is said both Rivenhall Parish Council and Whittam Town Council object, and so have many residents, and indeed more actually than several dozen more than is reported in the report. Rivenhall is, in terms of existing and the emerging local plan, at the lowest level of the scale of capacity to absorb development. Phase 3 Bellway, which is called Bluebells, has already added 58 houses to Rivenhall. This development would take that to 288. Rivenhall would double with this development. These houses would not be in Whittam, they would be in Rivenhall. They would pay their council tax to Rivenhall. If you look at the most recent completions in Whittam North and Rivenhall, with this site we're looking at a combined total of approximately over 900 houses, and there is no assessment of cumulative impact on highways or other services. The combined total for the two wards, the rural ward of Silver End and Cressing and Whittam North, is now over 2,000 houses and could be nearly 3,000 if this application and others in the pipeline are approved. That would equate to more than 20% of the entire Braintree District housing requirement to the year 2033 in just 2 wards. This application just reinforces that planning failure. And on this site, as others have said, there is no community centre provided, there is no GP surgery, there's no dentist, there's no other core service which would help to mitigate it. Page 21 discusses the National Planning Policy Framework. This application fails the NPPF due to the woeful lack of support from the community and the complete lack of proper engagement with the relevant councillors and local authorities. Councillor Mrlaga mentioned that for Whittam and I'd reiterated for Rivenhall. Page 23 confirms that BDC has a 5-year housing supply and that the relevant trigger in the NPPF is not engaged. The report confirms the application is contrary to both the existing and emerging local plan. Page 25 and 26 set out the proposed modal shift benefits, but the fact remains that this site is 2.2 kilometres from the town centre and 1.5 kilometres from the railway station. And whilst some people will walk or cycle, many will drive. And there is no actual analysis of the splits on modal use. The potential for cycle lanes towards the town centre appears highly speculative and clearly would be subject to, as the officer rightly said, TRO consultation. And not enough, I think, has been looked into this. As Councillor Mrlaga said, this was sort of sprung on us at a late stage. It wouldn't just involve the removal of those trees and the provision of cycle lanes. Now, I'm not against cycle lanes, obviously I'm very pro-cycling, but it would also remove all of the parking by one disabled parking bay in Collingwood Road. That parking is currently used for the doctor's surgery, it's currently used for people to go into the town centre to shop, and it's currently used for the public hall. All of it would go. It's also in a conservation area. Page 27 emphasises the lack of a full transport assessment, which is really quite extraordinary given the pressure I've already stated on the B1018, which sees regular queuing on a daily basis. On page 28, Essex County Council claims the bus access from Rickstones Road is safe. This is a bold claim, and as members might recall, the officer showed a picture looking back towards the back access of the bend in Rickstones Road. The visibility is almost non-existent, and vehicles hair along there way past the 30-mile-an-hour limit. The very last thing they'll be expecting to see is a bus coming around that corner. I don't know if the officer can put it back up. There. visibility is extremely limited. Photographs were not shown. You can just see the first houses there in Rickstone's End. Photographs were not shown of that cluster of houses, which is like a mini hamlet in Rivenhall, where the footways are very narrow and substandard, and the visibility to the south is very poor. Nothing is said in the bus gate about whether it will be lit. It's going to have CCTV. I presume it might be lit, and that will be right next to the group of houses that it emerges from, as well as those residents having buses coming past the house on a regular basis. On page 32, the market housing mix is discussed. 78% currently proposed to be 4 and 3 beds. Now, whilst there is a condition required to change this, it does reinforce the speculative nature of the application. On page 33, sports provision is discussed, and the wrong statement again is made that this development is in Whittam. And it is stated that apparently there is no access, and the word discounted is used, to any existing football pitches in Rivenhall. Well, again, that is materially incorrect. The Albert Moss playing field, which has a football pitch, not currently marked out, but it is a football pitch, is 900 metres away in Rivenhall and can be accessed by a safe footway all the way into the village. Now, whilst the provision of additional sports pitches in principle is good, these are in the countryside and immediately behind houses of Rivenhall residents who would thus experience a big change of environment from a quiet rural environment to sports uses. Page 35 discusses the impact on Rectory Lane. The report refers to the Rivenhall Village design statement, which I have with me this evening, and the curious claim that the development proposal is somehow compliant with the design statement aim of conserving the character. This is plainly wrong. The development will result in houses being built in close proximity to the lane. It's very difficult to scale this off the plans, but I think the nearest house is going to be 15 metres from Rectory Lane. And indeed, for a substantial part of its length, that will permanently change the character of Rectory Lane. There will also be the engineering works of a turning head being built on the lane, large enough for HGVs to turn. They have to be because of bin lorries. This adds to the damage to the lane caused by the Bellway 3 development further along the site. Officers also showed the unauthorised bridge, which is currently there, of scaffolding poles, which apparently is going to stay at least until next year. Nevertheless, the report does confirm the impact of the Bellway 4 phase would be moderate adverse on Rectory Lane. The comment, though, that currently the sense of walking in the countryside has already been diminished cannot surely lead to a conclusion that this further, much larger imposition on Rectory Lane is in any way justified. In other words, two bad things don't make a good. The report fails to mention that, as well as being a protected lane, Rectory Lane is also part of the John Ray Walk and a designated County Council quiet lane. Page 37 discusses tree losses. They are very substantial and yet again largely dismissed as being lower quality trees. No analysis is given in the report of the actual quantitative assessment, but I've done that this afternoon. I've looked through the tree report. There are 27 trees on the site which will be removed, including oaks, 10 part or whole removements of groups and areas of woodland, but no actual figure of the number of trees that's going to be lost in those woodlands. I mean, obviously it's going to be substantial. There's also going to be the loss of the trees potentially on Collingwood Road, and I'll come on to further losses which have not been identified. Page 38 identifies the site as having numerous protected species, including bats and great crested newts. But there is some uncertainty about the presence of bats, subject to further surveys on the tree the officer identified near the bus access. But surely that is a complete failure to deliver sustainable development. These matters should have been worked out before it came to committee. How can we possibly have a proposal where the bus gate, which is a crucial part in terms of sustainability alleged to this development, may not happen because we don't know whether bats are in a tree? It's quite a remarkable situation. On page 39, it is stated that it is possible to secure net gain, but it's not properly evidenced, and I'll raise this point again later. This site results in the loss of best and most versatile agricultural land, and this is a reason for refusal on itself, because, as I've already said, BDC has a 5-year supply, and so the loss is avoidable. And as we've also heard, there's conflict with the minerals plan. There is a curious comment, Madam Chairman, in the report that there's an existing quarry on the opposite side of Rickstones Road. Not that we know of, there isn't. There's a quarry near the A12, but there's no quarry opposite Rickstones Road. On page 43, coalescence is discussed, but we strongly believe, locally wrongly, local residents and councillors who live in Rivenhall know that this development will result in the final coalescence between Whittam and part of Rivenhall, and that is obvious on the ground, so to speak. BDC itself chose to keep the green buffer to the northern edge of this site, and I know, because I asked, the reason why was because officers thought they didn't want to, quote, stifle future development. That position appears to suggest that officers were prepared to see this site develop even while it was not allocated and even while the local plan committee reports in 2016 clearly set out the site would result in the joining of the two communities. Now, this is the most important thing I have to say, Madam Chairman. For some reason, the officer report tonight does not set out, as we saw in previous applications before this committee in recent months, what the local plan committee had to say about this site in 2016, and I've got the documents here. On the 13th of April 2016, the local plan committee report that the officers of this council set out recommended that this site is not allocated and included the reasons that at its closest point the development would be within 400 metres of Rivenhall main village. The development of this location would extend the built form of Whittam beyond its current limits, changing the character of the gap between Whittam and Rivenhall. The site would completely border the protected Rectory Lane and would change the nature of the quiet lane. The second time this came to the local plan committee was on the 15th of December. The comments were stronger. This was after the landowner stroke agents for them had said, well, can we have our site included? Officers came to the same conclusion that the allocation should remain unallocated. And these are the crucial words I want to read out. Officers conclude that the issues for not allocating this site in the draft local plan are coalescence, the impact on Rickstones Road and the local wildlife site. The officers of this council themselves have said that this site will result in coalescence. The report argues that the phase 3 on Rickstones Road has removed any meaningful separation between Whittam and Rivenhall, but this is plainly not the case. Phase 3, known as Bluebells, is a narrow development fronting Rickstones Road, whereas this phase 4 wraps completely round the northern side of Rectory Lane and comes up behind the houses further along at what we locally call Rickstones End. And I do have to ask the question, Madam Chairman, why is Rivenhall being treated differently to other communities near to major towns? BDC has fought very hard to avoid coalescence between Braintree and Rain and Braintree and Cressing, but it doesn't appear to be the case for Rivenhall. Fellow councillors on this committee and indeed the council as a whole will know that we have as many times had to ask for recognition of as a rural community separate from Whittam. But it apparently still is the case, as we've heard tonight, that we get scant mention. On page 43, air quality is discussed, and I've already mentioned about the B1018 and the close to exceedances and some years exceedances of nitrogen dioxide levels. On page 44, flood risk is discussed. There is no mention of the fact, and members of the LPC will know this, despite me raising this repeatedly, and we heard this earlier this year at LPC, that the John Ray Walk currently floods. So does parts of Rickstones Road, parts of Rectory Lane and Forest Road. And yet there's no mention of that in this report. Essex County Council sent a report to the LPC committee earlier this year when the LPC committee sent it back because it was so inaccurate about flooding. On page 46, the provision of a community building is discussed. There used to be a community building on Forest Road, but it was demolished and the site has now been built on. The correct area where the Section 106 money should be going is the Little Elms area. Anyone who knows Whittam North or Dorothy says that's where the Section 106 money should go. The area is crying out for redevelopment investment, and indeed BDC owns part of the land. And yet, once again, the proposal is to send the Section 106 money for community building to the other end of Whittam, several miles away. It really is quite extraordinary how site after site in North Whittam and Rivenhall this is happening. That is not commensurate with the legal requirement to ensure that Section 106 money is spent local and relevant to the development. And whilst BDC has talked to Whittam Town Council about this potential community money, it has not approached the parish council in whose area this site is situated. Page 47 sets out the planning obligations, and there has been no discussion with the parish council, not that I've been party to these, Madam Chairman, but I've been informed by the clerk there has been no discussion, about potential Section 106 monies that could benefit Rivenhall, the parish in which this site is located. Some of the potential ones could be improvements to the John Ray Walk, which currently has damage to it and floods, or there could be money put towards the two halls in Rivenhall, or the school, or the Albert Moss playing field, but absolutely nothing for Rivenhall. In terms of specific local impacts not fully addressed in the report, or addressed at all in the report, whilst the report refers to the Rivenhall Village Design Statement in terms of Rectory Lane, it completely omits what it says on page 17, and I have it here. The adopted Rivenhall Village Design Statement on page 17 states, and I quote, "The countryside between Rivenhall Village envelope and Witham Town development boundary should be protected from development to retain the rural character of this area." And Rectory Lane, Madam Chairman, which I've got a map of here, is only one of 3 protected lanes in the Witham area, the other 2 being on the west side of the town. As such, the need to protect this lane is very high. There is also a substantial local wildlife site along Rectory Lane, which was referred to in the local plan committee reports, and which this development site will come very close to, and that needs to be seen alongside the importance of Rectory Lane. As I mentioned earlier, the tree losses are not objectively assessed and miss out the large loss of trees and hedges along Rickstones Road. Now, this afternoon I went out with a tape measure, and officers, I'm afraid, have failed to pick this up. The proposed widening of the footway along Rickstones Road, so where it would come out from the bus gate all the way back down into Witham, or from the alternative crossing point through Bluebells, would be along an existing footway. There are hedges on both sides of that footway, and I measured the distance is at points all the way along. The distance stem to stem is 3 metres at most, and in some places it's less. Those hedges would not survive. Either one side or the other would have to come out, and that has not been assessed at all in the reports. That raises the amount of loss of hedges and trees, and if you look at that cumulatively with the loss of the trees, as the officer said at the bus gate entrance, it's going to have a major impact on the appearance of the street scene along Rickstones Road. There's a further material matter which the officers have not picked up on. The footway along Rickstones Road is a public right-of-way. It's not just the footway. I've checked all the maps. They show the public right-of-way through John Ray Walk, but they don't pick it up there. Converting that to a cycleway would require a legal order. You can't just change a public right-of-way like that, and that's not been picked up. It's a mere material consideration. So finally, you'll be glad to hear, Madam Chairman, I'll come to conclusions. The discussion on the planning balance admits it's a finely balanced decision. I believe that the recommendation has come down on the wrong side of that balance and that the proposal should be refused. The report sets out numerous conflicts with planning policy, and the weight given to some of these needs to be thought through very carefully. The conflict with the local plan is very clear. This is an unallocated speculative site in the countryside that was rejected twice by the local plan committee. And in addition, the coalescence effect is severe. Rivenhall will lose its identity if this development goes ahead. And that is a serious matter. There is avoidable loss of best and most versatile agricultural land, and there is a significant impacts on a protected lane and some impacts on an historic listed building. There is also conflict with the minerals plan, and overall there is harm to the landscape, with the last substantial rural gap between Witham and Rivenhall being developed. The tree loss is nothing short of severe and cannot be easily mitigated, and indeed it's not been properly objectively quantified as I've set out. The highways aspects have simply sidestepped the existing severe congestion on the road network through Witham on the B1018 and have not even mentioned the air quality issues along that road. The proposed mitigation is highly uncertain. The bus gate's uncertain, and indeed the cycle lanes along Collingwood Road are uncertain. This council has refused applications very recently near villages such as Silverend and Blacknotley for greenfield sites with similar considerations. There is no overriding planning reasons to grant this application. BDC has a 5-year supply, has granted thousands of houses in recent years, and Section 2 is in an advanced stage towards adoption. The Prime Minister himself recently said that the development of greenfield sites in the countryside has to stop and said brownfield should be preferred. We have a brownfield site just up the road in Silver End, lying idle. It's been there for years. For all the reasons I've set out above, Madam Chairman, I move refusal.
Thank you, Councillor Abbott. Does it find a seconder before I move on? Thank you, Councillor Beavers. Did you wish to speak?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, I would like to speak. Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that Councillor Abbott has brought up, and I'm just going to underline a few other observations and a final summary, if I may. So, I mean, quite clearly, it is a rural application on the edge of a town with a plan to bus in the residents, and as Councillor Abbott said, it will urbanise Rivenhall. It goes against policy CS8 to protect the best and most versatile land, and I think it was a member of the public that sort of brought that up in public session, and better ways of using our agricultural land on a more sustainable level. It constitutes overdevelopment in a rural area, and it is not an allocated site, and therefore it is not required. The agent, interestingly enough, on behalf of the developer, stated that the council did not have a 5-year supply at the commencement of this application process, and then further states, now the council does, this application will enhance that. I'm not aware that enhancing our 5-year supply, which took us a very long time to get, constitutes planning policy. The health contribution seems incredibly low for a development of this size, bearing in mind other developments are delivering health centres, and I think Sybil Headingham is a really good example of that. 2.1 million of public transport seems disproportionate to the health contribution, and over the years, despite a community call for action for a health centre in Witham, this application seems to be delivering a non-sustainable transport plan and additional sports pitches, which have already been delivered to the area around the academies and the new sports and leisure centre, which was also delivered. Councillor Mrlaga and Councillor Abbott state that not enough meaningful community consultation has taken place, and Councillor Mrlaga further states to defer the application back to the community. Madam Chairman, this council has agreed a new way of community engagement for planning applications at the earliest stages, and this is called a members' forum. I would move and second Councillor Abbott's recommendation and add that the immediate establishment of a Witham members' forum is set up and this application is sent to it. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Beavers. Councillor Beavers, I know you're new to the committee, but I'd just like to point out to you, the National Health Service, it tells us what they want. We have no powers over what they ask for, and we often say they haven't asked for enough, and that is something we can't change. Anyone else wish to speak? Councillor Mrs. Spray.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think this one is incredibly difficult. We do have a choice to refuse or approve. Actually, personally, I'm not inclined at the moment to go for either option for reasons I'll explain. There is a third choice, which I'll come on to in a minute. With regards to refusal, I personally don't think that there are strong enough grounds. It is an unallocated site. It is outside the development boundaries. But in the absence of any other reasons for refusal, I'm not at all sure that that alone will stand up to scrutiny. And I'm talking about, you know, the possibility of an appeal situation if it were to be refused. There are no, and like it or not, and actually Councillor Abbott spoke extremely well and went into a great deal of detail, but like it or not, there are no significant objections from highways or the historic buildings consultant or environmental health or landscape. We do know and we acknowledge that the health facilities in Witham are operating under the most enormous strain. It's been mentioned by many of the objectors and the town council, and it's been mentioned a lot of times at, you know, full council meetings and so on. Now, whilst as a local planning authority we are able to help to a certain extent with providing buildings for the expansion of health facilities and requiring Section 106 monies from developers and from the NHS, as we have done with this one. We've got no control over the management and the staffing of surgeries and health centres. That's the responsibility of the NHS. Education, which is also strained in this area, is the responsibility of Essex County Council, and we have got a request and an answer from them on Section 106 monies for this. The lack of this infrastructure, it isn't, in my view, going to be sufficient reason for refusal because it isn't within our remit. I mean, you know, there are things to commend about this development. Affordable homes, probably about 69, depending on the total number of dwellings built, if this gets approval, including there are 4 wheelchair accessible bungalows, and that's very welcome. I think the open space and sports provision is welcome. The allotments, the financial contribution, which is considerable towards the new community centre at Maltings Lane. My feeling was that that's something that the town would welcome, but I accept, and I noted what Councillor Abbott said, which was that Rivenhall Parish Council residents had not been asked or consulted, so maybe there is something to be said about that. Considerable bus service improvements to existing services and new services are all good. But we come on to cycleways, and this is where I do have a problem. Not particularly with the cycle paths immediately within the development or around it, which I think are probably okay. It's the Collingwood Road proposal, which is giving me a problem. Now, a few weeks ago, this council approved a cycling strategy, so it might seem perverse for me to say that I object to the scheme here, but the impression I get is that this has come forward quite late in the process and that there has been little or no time for consultation and feedback locally, and none at all with the cycling strategy group, which comes under Councillor Ritchie's portfolio. And I do think that's a serious submission, and I can very well understand the concerns expressed by the objectors. Trees are to be removed to enable the cycling route. Well, actually, Mr. Spencer in his statement and Catherine in her report has said that actually is not so. The trees, certainly the very nice big trees down Collingwood Road, won't be removed. I believe that still leaves some, maybe, to be removed. Now, I was asked recently at Council about tree removal on development sites, and I gave a very full answer to that, so I'm not going to go into that here, but it is the case, generally speaking, that some trees have to be removed on development sites in order to allow access and for the building of dwellings. And as a local authority, we do look to developers to limit tree removal as far as possible, and we encourage new planting and mitigation. And it's not against planning law for a site owner to remove trees. But as I say, the less the better. But it's not the tree removal on the site I'm talking about here. It's Collingwood Road, if there are some to be removed. There's also the issue of parking bays being removed. Now, we do want people to walk and cycle more and use their cars less, but it's not realistic to expect car use to stop just like that right now. And I do think the removal of the parking bays along the road is going to cause a real issue. This committee's either got to refuse or approve the application as it is before us. We can't pick some bits that we'd like to be approved and some bits we wouldn't. And it is a problem for me this evening. I do wonder, and I know that obviously we've had a recommendation we've had refusal moved and seconded, so you will need to take a vote on that. But I do wonder if there's a third option of a deferral might be a way forward. And I appreciate that that's not ideal for the developer or probably for officers, but it might allow the developer to go away and at least have a rethink about the cycleway on Collingwood Road and come back with something more acceptable. It's not going to satisfy everyone's objections around the build out of the site or the pressure on the schools and the health infrastructure, but it might help alleviate the issue of what sounds like an unpopular and unacceptable cycleway along one of the major roads through the town. I'm not saying that shouldn't happen at all, but I'm saying I think it needs a rethink and it certainly needs some consultation. So that's just a suggestion from me. I'll leave it there. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Sprague. Councillor Hensman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My issue here is mainly around the, again, the Collingwood Road proposal, in that with Section 106, it's normally used to mitigate the site itself, and therefore I would have suggested it would be better used elsewhere. But unusually for a Braintree member, I spend some time in Whittam every day, and I walk this route every day. And my concern is the crossing at Temple Mead has disappeared from the map. It means I have to walk the other way to get across the road, across the railway bridge, and then go back again. But then if you go down into the town, the cycle route gets to the Griffhaven Valley junction. That is wacky races. Try crossing it. Have the developer or anybody else actually tried walking it? It ends either side of that junction. There is no easy way. They cut the corner from all directions because you have a triangle within and you can go both ways round that triangle. Then you get the little roundabout with the avenue and Avenue Road. It all comes out. And as soon as those lights on Temple Mead go red, that all backs up. Then you get all the traffic that comes into the road and nobody understands that the one that's got the double line is the one that gives way, so therefore the one to the right gets to go. So it's, for me, that really needs to be rethought. Potentially connect to the National Cycle Route number 16, which goes along Whitehorse and down into the River Walk. Another one is the bus routes. I use that quite a lot as well. Coming from Braintree, you've got 38A, which already goes through Rickstone's Ends, I think Councillor Abbott called it. So you've got the half-hourly route there. Then you have the 90 that comes up to Forest Road, stops at Morrison's, does a small loop and comes back. Frequently on the bus shelters, there is on the what we call the dockmation signs, Essex County Council has put a message on there. Due to driver shortages, some routes will not operate. Therefore, where are these drivers miraculously going to come from in exactly the same way as we've got with the LGV logistics at the moment? Are they then going to divert the 38 or the 38A? So one goes one way, one goes the other, as they do when they get to Braintree, which means that you reduce the service from half-hourly to hourly along the route that was previously covered. Are they going to extend the 90, which means it would have to go around this development back round again? They've got to look at things like driver's hours. They can't just pluck these buses from anywhere or extend routes without looking at the hours. They need to work with the operators. So for me, the public transport, the alternative, the modal shift isn't there. And I'm certainly not convinced by Collingwood Road it is dangerous, Madam Chairman. Thank you.
Councillor Abbott.
Yeah, just briefly, Madam Chairman, I just wondered, probably because I was talking for so long, it got lost in the words, but Councillor Sprague said that I was proposing refusal, I think she said only on the grounds of the local plan. I wasn't, so just to be clear, it's
No, she didn't say that. She didn't.
That's the impression I got.
No, sorry, Chairman, no, that's not what I said, and it's
Well,
not what I meant, actually. It's not
It was
what I
about
meant, actually,
services. So can I just be clear?
Yeah.
The motion to refuse is based on the following. Local plan and coalescence, as set out in the Local Plan Committee reports from 2016, loss of best and most versatile agricultural land, conflict with the minerals plan, impacts on the protected Rectory Lane and the listed building, the Rectory, and the loss of trees and hedges on and off site.
Thank you. Mr. Martin Mason, you've made the trouble to come and attend our meeting. Do you want to make some comments from the point of view of the highways on some of the issues that we've been raising? It's such a shame for you to come and then we don't ask you anything.
No problem. Hope you can hear me okay.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, members. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Martin Mason, Strategic Development Engineer from the County Council. And it's my job to ensure that development is mitigated against in terms of highway impact and transportation impact. We're not for or against development. We have no interest in whether development goes ahead or not. We are just our role is simply to ensure that its impacts are mitigated. A few specific points that have been raised, but there's been an awful lot of points raised, but there's been a few specific points raised on highway issues. I think Councillor Abbott raised some concerns around visibility, where the access would come out onto Rickstones Road. The applicant is able to provide improved visibility in accordance with the design standards. And I know one of the objectors mentioned DMRB, but we're quite happy to go to manual for streets within a 30-mile-an-hour limit, so that displays would be in accordance with the manual for streets. I think he also mentioned whether there'd be lighting on the access road into the development. That is something that we would pick up as part of the detailed design for the Section 278, Section 38 agreement. Yeah, in terms of the relationship between the need for lighting and the enforcement cameras, I'm no expert in that particular field. That's dealt with by another team within the County Council. It may be the technology for the cameras enables they're not to be street lighting, but I can't guarantee that to be the case. As I say, that would come out in the wash as part of the detailed design for the formal agreements going forward. There was also mention of the public footpath alongside Rickstones Road. Yes, it is a public footpath on the northwest side, and the proposal is to provide a footpath cycle path. If a conversion is needed, because it may be that we're able to create, or the developer rather is able to create the cycleway alongside the footpath, then that would be fine. But if we do have to convert part of the footpath or all of it, then again we would pick that up as part of the Section 278 agreement. There are several elements of the scheme that require traffic regulation orders, and they are for the bus gate, for the prohibition of vehicular traffic in Rectory Lane, and then also Collingwood Road. Mrs. Ullman mentioned Rectory Lane, and the TRO is in effect made for that. So if the development were to come forward, there's no issue with the TRO in terms of severing the lane to vehicular traffic. The bus gate TRO is still being processed, and also the TROs for the Collingwood Road scheme. But as also mentioned by Mrs. Ullman, the 106 agreement is set up such that if the TROs were to fail, then there is a need for the developer to look for an alternative scheme or provide a financial contribution. And then I've got one more point down here, specific point, which was around the public transport contribution, which would come to the County Council were planning permission to be granted. And under no circumstances would we be looking to disadvantage existing customers or residents. If anything, they should benefit from a vastly improved service in the locality of the development, looking to improve the frequency and significantly improve the public transport package offer to existing residents and the new residents of the development. That's what I managed to make notes of, but of course I'm more than happy to answer any more questions specific to highways and transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Mason. Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Parker.
Yes, I'd just like to ask some questions, please, on highways. So I note that you decided that it was not necessary to require a traffic assessment. I'm not quite understanding why you felt that wasn't necessary. I can understand there's an expectation and a hope that people will switch to sustainable means of travel, but obviously that won't be possible for a lot of journeys, particularly if people are going to work, which is, I suppose, the main reason why people use their cars. And goodness knows where the people in this estate would work. So I am concerned, having listened to Councillor Abbott actually and the other members who know Witten well, about the level of existing traffic congestion in Whittam and what this would do to, what these additional vehicle movements would do to that congestion, and whether an assessment, a proper transport assessment was necessary to discover whether or not the level of disruption would reach that level of being severe, which I think is the hurdle that one must cross. The other two, I mean, there are lots of aspects of on this application about to do with travel and transport and the cycleways. I'll just pick out two more that it's sort of are bothering me right now. The bus gate going from Rickstones Road into the development. So if you are, I'm concerned about that bend actually that's on that what we've seen on the picture. If you are turning right, if you're in a bus going up Rickstones Road out of Whittam and turning right, is there not a danger that a car coming out the direction may run into the side of the bus? I mean, is there enough visibility for that? I mean, I can understand, I think, buses leaving the development and going into it, and hopefully there would be enough provision on a lane there to give enough distance to prevent any accidents. So that is concerning me. I'm concerned quite a lot by the additional traffic lights just by the station. How will that, I mean, I know from the rare occasions when I do try to exit station car park myself that you can sit there for perhaps the ages hoping that somebody's going to press a button on one of the pedestrian crossings. But there's obviously, there's only one bridge in that point going across the railway line. So I'm just concerned about putting an additional traffic light there would interfere a lot with the traffic flow. How is that going to be managed? Just those 3 points, please.
No problem. Thank you for your questions. In terms of the need for a transport assessment, I think where we've got to with Whittam is that I think it's appreciated probably on all fronts that we've done all we can in terms of the highway network in the town centre. There are some improvements that are to be delivered on the back of phase 1 and phase 2 of this site, which would provide some additional highway mitigation through the town centre. But since they were negotiated and agreed, I'm sure we don't need to suck eggs, but planning policy has moved on big time in terms of the emphasis is very much now on sustainable transport. NPPF was updated in July 21 and places even more emphasis now on sustainable transport. And I think it's not just that, it's also important that we locate development in the right location to minimise the need to travel in the first place. So I think, on balance, what we're saying is that given the location is probably right in terms of it being accessible, there's existing alternatives to the car, and the developer would be improving those significantly. And the test for capacity is, as you know, is severe. I think the residual traffic, of course, there will be some additional traffic on the network, but I think that would be very hard to fight that as being severe in terms of an appeal win. In terms of visibility on Rickstones Road, as with all the highway works, they've been subject to a stage 1 road safety audit and designer's response, something which we insist on before we agree to highway works in principle. As I mentioned, the visibility is in accordance with the required standards. And we've also ensured that the access design is capable of accommodating a bus without overrunning the curbs, etc., the swept path for a bus, etc., etc. In terms of additional traffic lights near the station, that would be the additional Toucan crossing, which is proposed on the southern side of the railway bridge. What we've said to the applicant is that they must be linked to the signals on the other side of the bridge, and also the part-time signals that are due to be installed at Chipping Hill as part of the phase 1 and phase 2 development. So the idea being that technology now is really quite clever in terms of monitoring flow and the needs of pedestrians to get the right balance. So that's our hope that that's going to work. And again, it's all about providing for pedestrians and cyclists. They should really have the upper hand now in the town centres.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Chair. To basics, we've had a great deal of detail, but as already been said, this is not an allocated site. We pride ourselves on being a plan-led authority. This isn't in our current local plan. It's not proposed in our emerging local plan either. It's outside any designated development boundary, therefore it's in the countryside, and countryside policies apply. Now, I appreciate that this application has been worked up over 2 years, and as has been said, for much of that time, we couldn't demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, but we can now. We have quite clearly, as a committee, acted on occasions pragmatically and granted some speculative allocated sites when we haven't had a 5-year land supply in order to get us up to a 5-year land supply. So we don't have to go on behaving as if we haven't got to that point. We don't need to continue that practice now. I think, Madam Chairman, that this is a phase too far, and I won't support it.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Councillor Swear.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Madam Chairman, I think I should declare MPI interest because I'm a member of Essex County Council on this, as there's been a lot of involvement with regards highways, roads and sustainable travel. That said, I have listened quite intently to the speakers tonight all round, and I think this is a really difficult outline planning applications for all the reasons that have been mentioned. However, I don't want to go across those again, but I think the vision that the developer with regards to sustainability is good. I am concerned, as has been spoken about, the cycleways. I don't feel that they've effectively been joined up and thought about in a deep enough way to actually weave sustainability through the whole of Whittam, and I know it can't happen overnight, but I think there needs to be a better long-term plan here, especially to be considered by officers, and especially as we have developed now a cycle plan. That said, I'd just like to ask officers, I've heard several times tonight about a reason potentially to not accept this planning application tonight is loss of best and versatile land. My understanding is that a lot of this part of the world that we have already given permission on to several developments, as in north and south of Halstead and many others, does consist of best and most versatile land. I'd just like the officer's opinion on that, please.
Would you like to do that, Chris? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you, Councillor Schweer, for the question. So the district is not short of best and most versatile agricultural land. We commonly find this particular issue with any greenfield development effectively of a site, that is a factor that weighs against the proposal. However, as Catherine's explained as part of the presentation within the report, given the supply that we have within the district, it needs to be considered, the loss needs to be considered against that specific context. So it does weigh against. Officer advice would be to not to use that as a reason for refusal in itself, but it does weigh against the proposal if you're looking at cumulative harms arising from the proposed development. Hopefully that answers the question, Councillor Schweer. Madam Chairman, I'm conscious Councillor Schweer may have some other points, but grateful at some stage if I come back on a couple of other points as well.
Did you wish to come back, Councillor Schweer?
No, thank you. I think that's explained. Okay,
I've got Councillor Bowers, then I'll come back to you, Chris. Councillor Bowers, please.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman. And yeah, I've obviously listened to the debate tonight, and I think, like Councillor Spray said earlier, there's obviously some good and some bad in this application. And though we're not in a position that we can ever cherry pick that situation at all. I know deferral's been mentioned in a few quarters tonight for one reason or another, and that may have some merit, and we'll obviously see how the vote for refusal goes. Just the question I've got is around the 5-year housing land supply, and I know Councillor Ann just referred to it, and it's the thing with it. I wrote down kind of what is the point of the 5-year land supply, and I know what the point is. It's rated against housing need and that and the like. But this is a committee and us, the council, to have tried our hardest to get to where we are at the moment to actually be able to demonstrate a housing land supply in the 5 years, and now we're sitting at 5.34. Though when we're judging it on, say, an application like this, we're now being told it's finely balanced, and we can't really use that as a reason to maybe refuse an application, even if it is finely balanced. So I'd like to ask the officer, can we, for this and probably some other applications going forward, can we have some sort of information in regards what are we classing as would be a strong position in a 5-year supply? So we wouldn't be talking at a later date about it being finely balanced, because we've got to where we need to, or we thought we needed to be with a 5-year supply, but we're now told we're not quite there, and it's a finely balanced thing. So can we have some more information in regards what we would see as a council, what is a strong position on the 5-year housing land supply, so we could be using that in this and further applications? Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bowers. Chris, you did want to come back. I think you could add that to your list of things you were going to mention.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I was going to come back exactly on that point. So thank you, Councillor Bowers, for the question. So, as members would appreciate, this is a particularly difficult issue in terms of 5-year housing land supply. So just to be clear in terms of what the MPPF says, firstly, we need to achieve a 5-year housing land supply, but it's also very clear that we need to maintain a 5-year housing land supply, and that is an ongoing challenge for us as an authority, as it is for every other local planning authority in the country. So that is not only in relation to planning permissions that are granted, but it's also linked to the delivery of housing within the district, which to a certain extent is out of our control because the council does not build the houses. That's reliant on private developers to come forward. However, we need to ensure that the permissions are in place to enable that housing delivery to take place, and we need to work proactively in order to achieve that delivery. So I think in the context of this application, officers fully recognise, again, this is a speculative application, it is outside development limits. We've clearly identified that there is a conflict with the development plan as a whole as a result of that. I think the position effectively that we're taking here is, given sustainability of the settlement of Whittam, given its proximity to the town, albeit, yes, it is located within the parish of Rivenhall, we can't ignore the fact that it is directly adjacent one of the district's 3 main towns. And with that comes a huge benefit in terms of the sustainability of the location in order to absorb that particular growth. The contribution from the application in terms of housing land supply is still considerable. It's adjacent to a development that's currently being built out by the applicant that already benefits from permission as well. So I think those factors need to weigh into the consideration. In terms of the wider point on 5-year, as I said, the ongoing challenge for us as an authority will be to maintain a 5-year housing land supply. And this is something which we will be reviewed every year when the planning policy team look to do the roll forward at the key date, 31st of March each year, to see what delivery has taken place, to see what permissions and supply issues have come out, and how sites are coming forward across the district. So it's something that as an authority we need to keep under regular review. I can't put a figure in terms of, to answer your question directly, Councillor Bowers, in terms of what we would consider to be a strong position. The reason for that is that it's not set out within the MPPF or government guidance. I think the reason why we are describing it as finely balanced and marginal and using those terms, and I would point out that that's been consistent in the way that we've described that since the change in the position in achieving a 5-year supply. We've been very careful to acknowledge, one, we're currently able to demonstrate it, but it is still marginal based on the supply figures that we have. We need to keep on maintaining it, and I think in the context, and it's been mentioned, the local plan section 2 is moving forward positively on adoption of section 2. If we're able to get to that stage, there would be a boost in housing supply. However, the ongoing challenge for us will be each year having to reassess the situation and making sure that we're getting delivery across all of our sites. So I'm afraid, in a roundabout way, that doesn't strictly answer your question, Councillor Bowers, but we don't have a firm figure that we could put on that it's 6 years or 7 years. The only other thing I would say, which we've mentioned previously at other committees, is in relation to appeal decisions that we've had, and I'll come back to the Gilded Terrace appeal decision in Braintree. We had a situation there which was received shortly after us being able to demonstrate a 5-year supply, where the inspector concluded that notwithstanding the presence of a 5-year housing land supply, given the limited harms arising from the developments, the inspector still attributed weight to the housing delivery and the benefits that were being achieved effectively from that scheme, and therefore granted planning permission for it by allowing the appeal. So where we are setting out a refusal, we have to have very clear grounds, defendable grounds at appeal to be able to resist even speculative applications still at the moment, and where we do recommend refusal, we believe those grounds exist. In this particular case, the conclusion that officers have come to is that the benefits do override and outweigh the limited harms arising from this proposal, and that is, when you look at it, the contribution being made to housing supply, but also sustainability of the settlements. So again, I appreciate that doesn't strictly answer the question, but hopefully that gives a little bit of further context, because it is a difficult issue, but we have to determine the applications that come before us, and we have to ultimately, if an application is refused, we have to be able to defend that application and appeal. Just two other further points of clarification, if I may, Madam Chairman, just in terms of the NHS and wider mitigation in terms of facilities. It's been mentioned already, but I think just to highlight, when we receive contribution requests from statutory quantities such as the NHS, we will seek to secure that. In reality, and I fully appreciate the concerns that have been raised and mentioned here this evening in terms of GP provision, getting access to a GP and health facilities, the reality is that a development of this scale would never provide that type of facility in itself for those units. It would be being provided across a wider geographical area to serve, but we are very much led by the statutory consultee on that, and the Section 106 heads of terms that have been outlined within the report seek to secure that contribution. The only other thing to say, just for consistency, and again I absolutely acknowledge the points that have been made about the suggested contributions for the Maltings Lane community building. The approach in terms of the Section 106 is consistent with previous phases. In the officer's view is that the facilities within Whitton would be more readily used by residents, and therefore that's where the Section 106 monies have been sought to be directed to mitigate the impact of the development, and that's consistent with the approach previously taken with Phase 1 and Phase 2, but also looking in another geographical area within Housestead and the Oak Road development, where we had the same situation there between the town of Housestead. We had a site adjacent to the town of Housestead in effectively another parish, and where the Section 106 benefits arising from that scheme went to the town, because that's where the facilities would be most likely and readily accessed. So I appreciate that doesn't address the issue that Councillor Abbott is raising and the concerns being raised, but that is I suppose the approach, the logic behind the recommendations set out in the report that officers have explained. Happy to come back on any other points though, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Chris. Councillor Mrs. Parker.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just wanted to ask some questions of Chris. I mean, I'm sure most other members of the committee, I'm finding this very, very difficult application, actually. There's no doubt that what's been put forward by the developer is actually a high-quality development with a design code, lots of open space, etc. But weighing against that, there are a number of factors. I think chief amongst my mind is this concern about the issue about coalescence and the reduction of the gap with Rivenhall. So it is extremely difficult, and I think we're all finding it's very difficult to weigh up the balance. But one thing that's still sort of outstanding in my mind, it's not relating to 5-year housing land supplies, but similar, but it's to do with the stage of preparation of our Section 2 plan, because I note that in the report, the officer recommends that we only give limited weight to the fact that it's not an allocated site in our Section 2 local plan, because the plan is not a sufficiently advanced stage of preparation. But I think we've been seeing sort of limited weight being attributed to Section 2 of the plan for some years, and yet we've had our examination public. I'm hoping that we are going to get an adopted local plan by the end of this year. So I would have thought it's an advanced stage of preparation. So I'm surprised that the weight that you're saying we should be attributing is only limited. So I just wonder if you could comment on that.
Thank you, Councillor Parker. So I suppose 2 points there. One, you're absolutely right. The Section 2 plan has gone through examination. I think the key point is we're waiting response from planning inspectorates, and then in terms of looking at the timetable, hopefully towards adoption. I think the key point in terms of conflict with the development plan as a whole is the fact that we still have the adopted policies in place, so specifically RLP2 and CS5, where we are still able to attribute weight to those policies. So in terms of conflict with the development plan, that is still, I think, clear at the moment. It's just that we will have a slightly different context on adoption of the local plan, because those adopted policies within the local plan review and core strategy will fall away and will be superseded by the new Section 2 policies in full, and then we would be able to apply a weight to those policies, and obviously, hopefully, still being able to demonstrate a 5-year supply on adoption of the local plan. So I think you will see a change in reports once, probably hopefully towards the end of the year, but that's very much dependent on the timescale. But yeah, weight ultimately is for the decision taker, so this is advice being provided to you by officers in terms of the application. But I would just refer you back, and critically, in terms of development boundaries, we have RLP2 and CS5, and contrary to some developers, we're saying, we're attributing weight to those policies still, albeit not full weight given the context of the situation.
Thank you, Chris. I've got Councillor Swear and then Councillor Abbott, and I think we're going to phone this one up because we've got one more application and it's now 20 to 10. Councillor Swear.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, could I just ask the officers, it's been mentioned about 2.2 kilometres from the town centre and 1.5 kilometres from the railway. In order to, we're encouraging, active travellers in the form of cycling and walking. I just wondered what the kind of timings would be on there if they had any knowledge of the walking and the cycling time to those, because I think that's relatively important for this potential development. Thank you.
How fast do you walk, Councillor? Sorry. Sorry, Councillor.
Madam Chairman, on that one I might actually pass over to Catherine or even Martin, if possible, to come back on that.
I think you might have made the point there. It depends how quickly you walk or how quickly you turn the pedals.
Yes.
I mean, back in whenever it was, we did Cycle Town for Colchester. There are lots of signs in Colchester which actually give you the time it takes you to walk or cycle somewhere. So that I'm guessing that's based on an average of some kind that can be calculated, but without, I can't give a specific times on this particular project. It's something, I'm guessing it's something that can be calculated. We've done it for Colchester.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Abbott.
Yeah, question for Mr. Pudgy. Can he explain, please, why the local planning committee in 2016 at 2 meetings so clearly decided that this site was not appropriate, including the key reason of coalescence and joining with Whittam, and yet this report before us tonight says exactly the opposite?
I was on that committee.
So I think the the simple answer to that question, Councillor Abbott. So, I mean, it is a matter of fact, it's been previously gone through that process. However, like other sites that have come forward, we need to do an assessment on the detail of the application that has come forward here, which is a different assessment process, because what we're looking at, albeit in outline, we are looking at a more detailed planning application rather than a local plan allocation. So we have to go into it in more detail. I appreciate that was the conclusion previously as part of that process, as part of the development management process in looking at this site and the assessment of the proposals. The conclusions and the officer view is set out within the report, and we've sought to justify that position. So I appreciate that there is a difference there over time that has changed, but that we're talking about two separate processes here in terms of local plan and development management, and the assessment process is different.
Makes you wonder if all the hours we spent on the local plan committee meetings you even have bothered in some ways. I just feel sorry as I sat on them week in, week out. Well, members, it's had a good airing, and we have a proposal for refusal to take first. All those in favour of refusing this application? Those against refusal? 3, 4. Abstentions? That application, that's fallen 5 to 3. So I now need something else moved, please. Councillor Mrs. Spray.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. As per my contribution earlier, I would like to move deferral this evening to allow the developer time to go back and revise or review the cycleway, particularly along Collingwood Road, and allow for some more consultation on that. That would be my main reason for asking for deferral. Thank you.
Does that find a seconder? It does. I'm going to put that to the vote now. All those in favour of deferral? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9, 10. Those against deferral? That has been agreed, so that application has been deferred. Thank you, members. Thank you, Catherine, and thank you all the people that came to speak. Now, members, before I go on to 5B, application 21000249 REM, land adjacent to Lodge Farm, Hatfield Road, Whittam. I have got speakers on this application, and I'm just going to ask you to move standing orders, because I can't see that we're going to do this in half an hour, and rather than interrupt the meeting. All those in favour, we extend the meeting. Thank you very much, members. Thank you. The first person that wishes to speak on this application is Councillor Michael Lager. Councillor Lager, you're speaking on behalf of Whittam Town Council again. Yes, please. Thank you.
All right. Yes, in this case, the committee report in front of you summarises and responds well to the Town Council's concerns relating to layout, and that is much appreciated, as the information wasn't available earlier. This development is proving a suitably high standard southern gateway to the town. It represents good working between the local planning authority and Redrow, who have also regularly included the Town Council in their community consultations. Unfortunately, the County Council's advice on highway aspects has missed the opportunity to refer to the cycling strategy, at that stage emerging, but which promotes good linkages from where people live to places of work, transport, recreation and the town centre itself. Although the adjacent Lodge Farm site as yet lacks specific development consents, it is a strategic site for 400 plus dwellings, and it's currently with the local plan inspector, where it's likely to receive approval. Accordingly, the Town Council wants to see a foot and cycle connection between the two sites as the network gradually builds up. Legal powers exist under which the intervening so-called ransom strip, which is preventing this linkage, could be brought into public ownership to bring this about. It would help if an appropriate condition on layout could be added to any consent, and if this can't be done immediately, the LPA has powers to modify any consent at a later date. Finally, with the current interest in heating systems other than individual gas-fired boilers, there's an opportunity here to promote solar and/or heat pump systems. This may not yet be in a specific policy, but as with electric charging points, which are included in the report, the LPA can include a similar condition requiring a scheme to be prepared for your approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And the final person wishing to speak this evening is Mr. David Fletcher. He is speaking on behalf of the applicant, Redrow Homes Limited.
Thank you, Chairman. Redrow Homes Planning Director Chris Gatland wanted to attend the meeting tonight, but unfortunately, due to current procedures, he was not able to attend, so I'm reading out this statement on his behalf. Chris has firstly asked me to emphasise Redrow's commitment to the decision-making process and also acknowledge that efforts have been made to work collaboratively with both your officers and the Highway Authority throughout the project. We're very welcome to hear the comments from Witham Town Council that they also welcome our engagement and that they consider this development to be a high-quality scheme. Some of you may recall back in 2017, Redrow speaking on this application for the first phase, where there was a clear commitment to the layout and the quality of the housing design. The site-wide design guide for the site was approved in 2018 to ensure that high standards set from the first phase of housing was built would be maintained for future phases. As the development has taken shape over the last few years, we hope you will agree that Redrow has delivered what they promised in terms of design quality. The development proposals have been through an iterative process. The identification of opportunities for improvement, both by your officers and other members of the project team, has always been considered by Redrow. The proposals before you this evening were first tabled in their initial form back as long ago as September 2019. But however, following initial discussions with officers, we withdrew this application before resubmitting earlier on this year. We agreed to reduce the total number of units proposed, adjust the parts of the internal road structure, and to improve the open space within the development layout. We are proud of what we have achieved, and we want future generations to take pride in the development as an attractive and a desirable part of the town. As we look into the future and considering the long-term impacts of the development, we want to provide assurance that Redrow is working proactively with manufacturers and contractors to continuously improve sustainability performance. This has been recognised with the receipt of 2 Global Good Awards for commitment to sustainability and for efforts to reduce waste. Redrow also appeared in the Financial Times inaugural list of Europe's climate change leaders in 2021 for sustainability efforts. From an energy performance perspective, all Redrow properties are in the top 1% of homes in the UK, and Redrow are busy preparing for a move away from fossil fuels, trialling a number of alternative energy sources to enable wider rollouts. This includes water-saving features provided throughout the development. We are confident that the final 2 phases of the new home proposed at Witham will meet owners' and occupiers' requirements. You will hope that we will agree with it. We have designed an appropriate scheme, and you feel able to follow your officer's recommendation. The last thing to say, we've talked a lot tonight about 5-year housing land supply and delivery. It's imperative from a Redrow perspective to obtain reserve matters approval tonight, which will enable contractors to continue on site and deliver this next phase of development quickly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. Thank you. Well, that brings us to the end of presentation, people making a statement. We'll now come to the presentation, which is going to be made by Alison. Thank you, Alison.
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, members. Given the time, I won't go on too long, I hope.
I think we've all read the report.
This application I present to you this evening is in relation to Lodge Farm in Witham. The application seeks reserve matters approval for appearance, layout and scale for phase 3B and 4, which comprises 216 dwellings with associated landscaping, public open space, allotments and parking. Just to give you some context, Lodge Farm was granted outline approval in 2015 for the erection of up to 750 dwellings a primary school, an early years centre, enterprise centre, and retention of the existing barns for mixed-use purposes. The slide shows the illustrative master plan for the site that was approved at, well, no, it was not approved. It's an illustrative master plan that was with the outline application. A site-wide design guide was also was approved by way of condition of the outline application. There have been a number of variations to the original outline application, one of which was approved earlier this year to reduce the number of dwellings on site to up to 665 dwellings, as the delivery of 750 dwellings as originally proposed has proved to be unrealistic. So far, the reserve matters for application 1, 2 and 3A have been approved on site, which form essentially the southern part of the site and the top northeastern corner. To date, the site has, so overall 308 dwellings have been approved, but to date the site has delivered a total of 242 dwellings. 70 of these have been affordable, of which 49 are social rented and 21 are shared ownership. The application presented to members this evening forms part Phase 3B and 4 of the wider master plan, which sits on the northern part of the site adjacent to the railway line. Phase 3B and 4 seek to deliver 216 dwellings. Dwellings would be in the form of 2 and 3 storey houses, masonettes and apartments, and would range in size from 1 to 5 bedroom units. The site provides 151 market dwellings and 65 affordable dwellings, which equate to 30% affordable, in line with the Section 106 approved at the outline stage. 49 of which are affordable rent and 16 of which would be shared ownership. Should this application be approved, a total of 520 dwellings on site will be deliverable overall. The design ethos of Phase 3B and 4 is underpinned by the overall vision of the master plan to provide an attractive gateway into the town with a mix of commercial, residential and open spaces along the northern side of Hatfield Road. The layout of the proposed development has been subject to extensive pre-application discussions with officers over the last 18 months. I now turn to the main matters for consideration as part of the assessment undertaken. In terms of the layout proposes, the developable area would measure approximately 7.23 hectares with 1.78 hectares of green infrastructure. Overall, this gives a gross density of approximately 24 dwellings per hectare and a net density of 29.8, neither of which are considered excessive and both of which are considered appropriate for this location. The proposed layout in general terms is broadly rectangular in shape and is centred around a tree-lined spine road, which you can see runs through the centre of the site. The proposal also includes 0.36 hectares of allotments which would be positioned in the southwestern corner of the site and would sit comfortably within a dedicated area with their own access point. The full specification and details of the allotments would come forward by way of Section 106 obligation attached to the outline application. You can see the proposed layout of the allotments, but that is not actually the set layout. The layout also includes pocket parks on the eastern side and another on the western. In terms of scale, the majority of the development is 2-storey. 2 plots are 2.5-storey dwellings due to their key location, and all flatted blocks, 5 in total, are 3-storey. You can see on the plan, so the green represents 2-storey dwellings, purple represents 3-storey dwellings, although it looks slightly blue, and the yellow represents 2.5-storey dwellings. All the orange areas represent garages. Phases 3B and 4 are located within 2 character areas, as identified in the site-wide design guide for Lodge Farm. The northern part of the site lies within the northern railway edge character area, which is defined by its landscape buffer and built frontage consisting of 2-storey houses and 3-storey flats. The majority of the site lies within the neighbourhood setting, which is the southern part of the site character area. A strong, legible, formal street pattern is employed with tree-lined spine roads or boulevard playing a key role in defining the feel of the character area. There's some overall house types, traditional in nature with dual pitch roofs and classically proportioned doors, window openings. Internally, all the house types meet the nationally described space standards, which set out the required internal space standards for new dwellings of all tenures. The development is also compliant with the Essex Design Guide in terms of back-to-back distances between new dwellings. All garden sizes are compliant with the Essex Design Guide, and all flatted blocks have been provided with carefully designed amenity spaces. In terms of landscaping, the application proposes 1.37 hectares of open space, an extensive hard and soft landscaping scheme across the site, which has been reviewed by the Council's landscape officer, urban design consultant and ecology officer, and is considered to be acceptable. These, if you can see them, not really. These slides show the details of the hard and soft landscaping towards the east and the west of the site. This area here is where the play area is going to be provided, more of a natural play area. And this area here, the pocket part, which is to the north, kind of east of the site, that's going to be more of an incidental area with trees lined, but nothing in terms of kind of play equipment. In terms of tree loss, the proposal requires the removal of 9 low category trees, which are category C and U, and the removal of 2 sections of hedgerow. If I zoom in a bit, you'll be able to see where these are located. It's the areas that are indicated in grey along this existing ditch, which is going to be used as part of the SUDS drainage for the site. Their removal is necessary to facilitate features such as the site's spine road and cycleway, in addition to one of the formal areas of public open space. To compensate for the loss, the development incorporates native plants and those of wildlife importance. And with the new MPPF and tree-lined streets, there are over 100 trees on site that are going to be provided just for this phase. The provision of new back roosting opportunities within new buildings and retains mature trees around most of the border, all of the edges of the site, have been provided, along with bird nesting opportunities within new buildings. With regard to bats, the site lighting scheme has been designed to minimise its impact on bat species. However, a condition is recommended to ensure that further and full detail of the proposed lighting scheme is submitted for approval. In terms of highways, the impact of the development on highways network is assessed and accepted at the outline application stage. However, parking provision is part of consideration at reserve matter stage. In terms of parking, private provision would be made across the site and would exceed the requirements set out in the Essex parking standards, with 1 space per 1 bed dwelling and 2 spaces per 2 or more. In total, provision would be made for 415 spaces and 10 size compliant garages, as opposed to 409 spaces, which are the compliant. Visitor parking would be spread out across the development with a slight shortfall of 7 spaces. Although this is not considered to be materially significant, particularly given the slight over-provision of private spaces. There is a cycleway that runs along the southern side of the site. I think the best way to show you would be from the landscaping plan. I'll just go back here. So there's a segregated cycleway that runs throughout the site and joins into Alexis Way here. It also runs down phase 2A here. This is included on the parameter plans for the movement for cycles and pedestrians. In terms of the impact on the existing residential amenity, the application site does not abut any existing residential development apart from its own. The closest existing residential development is positioned to the east, but this is on the opposite side of phase 3A, over here, and has been designed to accommodate the approved adjacent phase. In terms of noise and the impact on the main railway line could potentially have, the suitability of the location for residential was assessed at the outline application stage. However, policy has moved on since the original outline was approved. Therefore, the Council's Environmental Health Officer has requested conditions relating to the verification of required noise attenuation measures for new dwellings and an overheating assessment to demonstrate that the new dwellings will have sufficient ventilation in place to facilitate cooling, with noise mitigation measures in place as well. So that essentially if people do open their windows, they get the ventilation without having to be subject to the noise. In terms of water drainage, the applicant proposes to utilise a SUD system, which will connect into the SUD system for the remainder of the Lodge Farm development. The nearest SUD's attenuation basin is based just here on phase 3A of the development, and it runs down the side here. So this phase would essentially link into the existing SUDs. This is essentially in the form of the existing ditch that runs down the middle of the site, where it would be held before being gradually released at an agreed rate with the local LLFA and Anglian water into the existing sewer. In terms of representations made on the scheme, I know Whittam Town Council have made a few representations on connectivity between Lodge Farm and Wood End Farm. This Wood End Farm, which is allocated in section 2 of the local plan, the draft local plan, is currently a live application with the council. This is the illustrative master plan that was submitted with the application, and you can see on the right hand side is Lodge Farm. This section of land that runs down in between the two sites is a ransom strip that is outside the ownership of both developments. So Lodge Farm's red line runs along the eastern part of that strip, and Wood End Farm's red line runs upon essentially the western part. So in terms of connectivity, yes, there are problems connecting the two sites. However, for developments like this, you'll find that people will make their own pedestrian movements through, depending on, this is obviously going to be a buffer landscape between the two sites as well. But to future-proof Lodge Farm and Wood End Farm, they have been in talks with each other to be able to link these up to future-proof both sites, so that there will be if we can get connectivity in the future, that can be achieved. Probably not for vehicular, but it could potentially be. But definitely for cycle and pedestrian, it would be a real win if we could somehow sort that area of land out in between. We are very aware of the issue. Energy efficiency has also been brought up, and the outline planning application for Lodge Farm was granted a considerable period of time ago at a late stage when draft local plan policies could not be applied to proposed development. Energy efficiency also comes through building control regulations, but having said that, the question has been posed to Redrow given the climate agenda, and they provided a list of energy efficiency measures that are incorporated into the new dwellings, and these can be seen on the screen. In conclusion, officers consider the scale and layout of the proposed dwellings on site are considered acceptable and in accordance with the parameter plans and site-wide design guide approved at the outline stage. The overall design and appearance of the dwellings and overall principle of the scheme's architectural treatment and material selection are considered appropriate for the site. The proposed soft and hard landscaping and urban realm are of high quality and well considered, and they would create distinct open space whilst enhancing the overall architectural setting of the site. The proposed landscaping seeks to enhance and increase biodiversity on the site and its surroundings, and is therefore supported. The location and quantity of mix of affordable dwellings on site is acceptable in accordance with the approved section 106. Overall, it is considered that the detailed proposal constitutes a sustainable residential development in an appropriate location, and accordingly officers recommend that the reserved matters are approved subject to conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Alison, could I just ask a question? BDC Landscape asked or made some comments, and in the report it says the applicant then revised the scheme and responded to these comments. Does that mean they agreed?
Yes.
It does mean
yes,
they agreed.
The scheme has changed.
All right, and condition 5, we have recently been putting in an additional part about the trees must be watered regularly. I think this is something Councillor Mrs Parker will probably know the exact wording that she likes to have put in. I'm wondering if we could have that added, please. We think it's very important because if a tree dies after 5 years, you've lost 5 years of growth, and if they're watered from stage 1, that's not likely to happen. So a watering system has to be approved, please. And I'll open it up to the members now. Thank you. Councillor Abbott.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I was interested to hear the speaker from Redrow about sustainability and climate change. I can't help but say, have a word with your people at the Silver End site, because it's on the edge of a village in a bat habitat and it looks like Las Vegas. You could save a lot of energy and improve the quality of the environment by turning some of those lights off. This is an allocated site, Madam Chairman, and is an agreed phase, so there's no problem with the principle. I've only got a few things to say. One of them is the concern about the comment from Anglian Water. I know it's not a nice subject, but it is a topical subject. They're saying that the current system does not have capacity. Now, I appreciate there's a dilemma here in that legally they have a statutory duty to accommodate, but we are adding thousands of houses onto the same system, and I just flag up, it's an issue we've already got in Silver End with sewage backing up into people's gardens. I'm having a very interesting conversation with Anglian Water, actually, because it's the advice they're giving me is different to what they're giving the council officers, which I shall say more on at another time. But could I ask, please, what officer view is of that? Are we just granting further pressure on the system with no guarantee it'll be sorted? Second issue, did I see that most of the affordable housing is positioned near the railway line? And if it is, why is that the case? And then my final question was really picking up on the point made by Witham Town Council. I mean, it's very good to see the cycle lane within the site, but what about the connectivity to the town centre? You know, despite what the ECC officer says tonight, and I disagree with a lot of it, Witham is slowly grinding to a halt at peak times, very heavy congestion. So this development is going to add more traffic coming through Witham. What are we doing? You know, great bells and whistles for the Bellway site, apparently. What are we doing in terms of this site, in terms of connectivity to the town centre?
Who's going to respond?
Madam Chairman, if I can perhaps come back on the foul water point and then perhaps hand over to Alison for the affordable housing point and also cycle world. I'm happy to come back on that as well. Just in terms of the Anglian Water point, I think the two key points here is that this is an allocated site along with the adjacent site at Wood End Farm. So this is planned growth within the local plan. It's expected growth and pressure as a result of the network. And as you've said, there is a responsibility on Anglian Water to ensure that that facility is improved. They're obviously aware of the development as we've consulted them, and similarly they're aware of the strategic site on the adjacent land as well. So that should give us comfort that the matter will be resolved by the statutory foul water authority. If I can pass over to Alison just to clarify the location of the affordable housing, and then also on the cycleway point, although as I said, I'm happy to come back on that as well.
So in terms of the location of the affordable dwellings, during pre-application discussions we did actually talk about this. A lot of the affordable housing that we needed for this particular phase was flatted developments, and the flatted developments, in accordance with the parameter plans, and where the stories, the three-storey buildings have been proposed, are along that northern boundary. And if you can see, this is a flatted development here, and these are flatted developments here. So whilst this does actually look like it's adjacent to the railway, these particular elements aren't. You've still got a mix. We still have got a mix, given that this phase 3A here is also dwellings. So there is, whilst it does look kind of quite affordable rented in this area here, it is mainly because the need was for flatted developments and flatted units, and this is where they were located in the parameter plans at the outline application stage. I hope that answers your question. Secondly, in terms of cycle improvement works, as part of the outline section 106, there was a cycle contribution fund of £270,000 that was to go towards delivering a cycle way along Hatfield Road. Martin, please feel free to jump in here because I wasn't around when this was actually approved at outline stage. And there is a large package of works for cycle improvement works that actually, if I go back to the map, I can show you where the cycle improvement works will be. So essentially, it goes off the map, but there was a big package of delivery of cycle improvement works that go along Hatfield Road. They then go through the Electus estate, and they take you through the river walkway. And the river walkway, you can then go either up to the station or to the town. We are actually looking at extending this as part of the Wood End Farm application package of cycling works as well, so that there is a cycleway all the way to the top. The Maltings Lane development as well has some cycle work improvements that again carries them up Hatfield Road and into the town. I don't know if you want to elaborate, Martin. It might be spot on. There you go.
Right. Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question to Chris. So cycling's been a bit topical this evening, so it's probably due to kind of a question like this, but during the development and construction phase, is there any way that we can get developers to liaise with our project teams now that a cycling strategy has been agreed by this council, so that we can start to obviously kind of link in some of the connectivity issues that have been highlighted on two applications this evening, to ensure that any monies allocated are factored into a strategic plan, our strategic delivery plan for a better cycling network, and that obviously we can kind of start to marry up some of these so that we deliver some connectivity.
I think if it's okay, I might have to defer to Ailey or to Martin on that point. As I understand it, these are a package of measures that have been previously agreed, and some of which have been implemented already. So perhaps if Alison or Martin can elaborate on that, if that's okay, Councillor Ritchie.
I think the point that's being made is that for this particular site, the cycle package was agreed as part of the outline consent, and Alison has explained what that package of measures is, and part of it's been delivered. And I think then the point that's being made is that with Wood End Farm next door, what we're doing is we're working closely with Alison to ensure we get further connectivity from that site through the Lodge Farm site, Alexis Way estate, into the Spinks Lane and onto the railway station. Is that the point you were trying to make? I wasn't entirely sure.
Yes and no. So it's just whether or not during that the delivery of that, consideration can be given to our own district council's cycling strategy, to ensure that we can link that up to some of the projects or programmes that we're working with Essex County Council and ourselves, to ensure that we've...
Absolutely, yeah. And going back to the previous item, some of the works that were proposed as part of that are in accordance with the cycling strategy for the town.
That's Mrs. Parker.
Yes, I just wanted to ask a question about condition 4, which deals with the issue about overheating and dwellings which are next to a railway line in particular. So the proposal is that if where necessary, a scheme for alternative means of ventilation is put forward. Would that also cover alternative means of cooling? I mean, I'm thinking of possibly, I don't know whether one would want to have air conditioning units, but certainly possibly fans and things. Would that? I mean, I'm just concerned about the word ventilation actually, and whether we should also include cooling. That's just I'd interest to hear what your views are on that. And then secondly, just on yes, thank you, Councillor Scattergood, for pointing out condition 5. It would be helpful if we could have something about requiring trees to be watered. Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Parker. It does actually, condition 4, it does actually say heating and cooling.
Heating and cooling.
Heating and cooling in all weather. And with reference to climate predictions. So when they submit the ventilation, essentially, if I'm honest with you, I always refer that to our environmental health services to assess as to what's appropriate. But time has moved on since the outline application. There is actually a condition on the outline application in terms of noise, but it's to do with, the obvious. If it's hot, people don't want to open their windows because the trains are going past, so it has to deal with the cooling as well as the heating.
We've used this condition on other ones next to the railway line. Yeah. Well, no one's moved anything. Councillor Mrs. Spray.
Thank you, Chairman. I was just going to say I couldn't remember whether anybody had moved anything or not, so I will. I just want to thank Alison for a very good and very clear presentation. And I don't think it's very often I'd say that an application, whether it's outline or for reserve matters for 216 homes, feels straightforward, but this one certainly does after the last few hours. I think it's very good. I'm very pleased to see the list of energy efficiency measures at the end. I think that's very commendable. And yes, happy to move Officer's recommendation for approval.
Thank you, Councillor. Does it find a seconder? It does. Councilman, did you wish to speak?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm happy to support an allocated site that went through call for sites and was accepted, went through the local plan process, hasn't attempted to sneak in an extra phase by the back door. The result we see, no objections from local residents at all.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Blocker.
Madam Chair, could I just ask whether that those recommendations also include an amendment to condition 5 to require the...
Yes, I did ask for that, so yes, I presume it would be put in. Alison had already nodded that she would put that in when I asked. So, Councillor Mrs. Spray and Councillor Mann, that adds the watering condition that we've just recently been applying to new trees.
Fine, Chairman.
Yeah. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. If I may just ask one question, make one comment. I thought I knew quite a bit about trees, but what is a liquid amber tree? I don't know what it is. Just interested more than anything. And just to...
It's non-native, according to...
Never heard of it. And secondly, we're talking about the connectivity with these sites to stations, etc. Many people have got electric bikes now, including myself, and I can do 20 miles an hour without any effort. We don't have really many hills in Essex. So that's an option for lots of people. So we're talking in terms of time, walk, cycle. Well, the maths aren't difficult to work out. It doesn't take many minutes to do a mile. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, it has been moved and seconded that we grant this application with the condition 5 slightly changed to add the watering. All those in favour? Thank you. That is unanimous, members. Thank you, members, and thank you, everyone. Thank you, officers. That brings us to the end of our planning meeting. And can I just remind you all, we have another meeting next week and the week after. So please do not forget. Thank you. Good night.